let me tell you what is the objective with which we plan to have this session today. I would just quickly talk about what InfoSec Train is. I would let you guys read this. This gives background about InfoSec Train, which is a great organization doing great job in terms of training in cybersecurity space. You must have seen a lot of messages on social media about people clearing their CISAs, their CISSPs, their CISMs, their privacy certifications with the services provided by this firm. So I would just let you guys read this slide, right? So let's move on to the scope of the discussion, right? So, I would be talking about the scope of this discussion. Many people are privacy. Many people ask me that, what are we gonna hear from you on privacy? What should we expect from this seminar? Because privacy is a new subject, and here is what I believe I would be doing through this 4 hours that we would be interacting, or 3.5 hours that we would be interacting. I would take you through the journey of how an enterprise implements its privacy program, right? Now, I know that when we talk about privacy, it may not be very correct to only focus on one regulation, right? Because there are different regulations, GDPR being one of the leading regulations that started this debate in many enterprises about cybersecurity, about privacy, how they integrate, and things like that. And then one of the regulations that many of you might have heard of that created a lot of buzz in the industry was the California Consumer Protection Act, which is also known as the CCPA. But for those of you who come from privacy background, you might know that there are other countries that are releasing their own privacy regulations, right? New Zealand being one. There's a recent privacy regulation launched by India. This session would talk about various regulations that you have in this space, but the focus would be on GDPR. Why? The reason being, as I take you through this journey of an organization implementing GDPR, and as I introduce you to different regulations, you would realize that by far, GDPR is the most serious regulation, that has specific requirements from an organization to implement in terms of its privacy program. And to a great extent, I could say with confidence that once you have implemented your privacy program on the basis of GDPR, you would be pretty much covered with most other regulations globally, right? Although there are some nuances, although you have to look at whether other regulations, are in scope for you, do you really need to adhere to them? There is a particular approach or method that we have to follow to even understand that piece. Because I know many of you who are professionals in the organizations might have come across this scenario where an organization comes and says, does CCPA apply to me? Yeah. Or tomorrow, an example might be InfoSec Train, thinking that, do I need to comply with GDPR? Because I've invited so many people for trainings, right? And they have provided their personal information. Many of you, just before you joined this session, provided with your email ID, which was optional, but I'm sure many of you did that, right? So do they need to comply with GDPR? There are many such questions that we would be trying to answer through this session, right? So the scope of this discussion includes introduction to the basics of privacy. The reason I say basics, it does not really mean basics. The reason I say basics of privacy is because when you get into understanding the complexities of privacy, you would realize that a 3-hour, 4-hour session may not be truly making us, very much privacy aware, right? But yes, that does not mean that there would be no value provided to you guys through this session. Would I be wrong, or would I be exaggerating by saying that after this session, you guys would be able to go ahead and start thinking about implementing privacy in an enterprise? I would say absolutely yes. That is the intent of this session. You would know all the basic tenets of a privacy program. You would be able to implement a privacy program just by listening to me patiently, right? Now, having said that, here is my request. My personal view always is I prefer to give sessions standing up in front of people face to face, because that way is everyone attentive. Everyone is able to understand what is being said. Keep your focus. It's a long session. Keep yourself in there, because trust me, there would be a lot to take home. And the reason I say that is I've not brought this material from books. This material that you would see in these 3 hours, I can guarantee you is not available on the net, right? This is my experience implementing GDPR, CCPA kind of regulations for more than 10 enterprises. By enterprises, I mean enterprises that have 200,000 people working from them. I am trying to say that I have done implementations of more than $10 million worth of work in GDPR and CCPA privacy space. And I really wanted to get a platform where I can have people like you come in and look at what are the challenges globally faced by the organizations. What do organizations do to implement privacy and things like that? Where are we in this industry, right? Now, having said that, the goal is to understand the challenges faced by the organizations, right? And the session will also discuss the trends and enterprise privacy program implementation guidance. That would be real-time, practical discussions. Having said that, I would just quickly pause here, because this is the most important part of the presentation. So let us go ahead and jump in. Here is the key focus of this discussions: regulations, standards, industry triggers that mandate privacy implementations, with a key focus on GDPR. So our key focus on this is not ISO for reasons as I just explained. GDPR is the biggest regulation that organizations need to comply with. In terms of ISO, let me tell you, ISO is 27701, which they've launched, is not a regulation. It's an industry standard. You can call it best practices. It's a good privacy framework. But if I don't follow that, a regulator is not going to come knocking at my door saying that he would be penalizing me with a $5 million fine, right? But with GDPR, regulators are going to do that because it is a regulation. It is not just an industry standard, right? So we would focus on GDPR. Also, there is no other privacy book of knowledge, that is so comprehensive as, we have GDPR here. Now, let us talk about key components of privacy programs, key privacy trends and challenges faced by organizations, and careers in privacy. Now, at this stage, I would also like to talk about a little bit about myself. My name is Shashank Roy. I've been in the training industry for many, many years now. Primarily, I used to perform a lot of privacy-based certifications, trainings, CISAs, CISSPs of the world. I myself have a range of certifications. I have more than 20 certifications and accreditations that I follow, starting from CISA, CISSP, CIPP, US. I'm very heavy on cloud with my specialization in AWS, Azure, and to some extent, I have exposure to Google Cloud as well, right? And talking about, GRC platforms, I've been Archer GRC and ServiceNow GRC developer for close to 10 years now. Overall, in the past 20 years that I've been working, I do this for interest, these kind of trainings, these kind of seminars. But till very recently, I was employed with a Big Four audit firm called KPMG. And after a very successful career of close to 10 years with them, I just parted my ways and I started working for a global bank as their head of GRC practice, right? So in my role as a head of GRC and controls, I do a lot of privacy implementations. I do a lot of GRC implementations, including Archer GRCs, and I do a lot of control testing, right? Cybersecurity control testing. So that is specifically my background that I bring. With my 20 years that I've spent in the industry, I've, as KPMG, done work for almost more than 20 leading financial sector banks, both in privacy and cybersecurity implementations. So basically, whatever I would be sharing today is first-hand experience of what happens on the ground, right? And how an organization implements privacy and where the organization faces challenges in maintaining their privacy programs, right? Let us start with this slide. I like this slide. The question is, as it might be in the minds of many of you, that what is or how promising is the career in privacy? And the reason I say that is because till even 5 years back, not many organizations truly cared about privacy. What has changed so drastically that every big organization, starting from Facebook to Google, is facing the heat, right, of not being privacy focused, right? I'm sure you guys might have gone through some funny videos with the congressmen asking Google's CEO, whether or not they track people, right? So there are reasons behind it. Some of it is misuse of personal data, right? There is no doubt or denial, or I would not be munching my words, that big organizations, big giants, right, Google and Facebook, had demonstrated in the past that they have not taken due care with personal data of people that they had. Having said that, what I'm trying to say is a few cutouts from newspapers, from news online that I have brought here to the table, right? Google, for example, introduces attribution powers ads and analytics with machine learning. Now, that whenever I go to a shopping mall, there are ads that automatically start coming to me saying that, hey, there is a great deal in this mall. You can buy an iPhone for 30% less. Now, how did someone on earth know that I am in that mall, right? Someone was definitely monitoring my geolocation. And who else than that beautiful app called Maps, on your Google phones that you have installed, right? And then there is data analytics, then there is machine learning, then there is robotic process automation to tell some components, some ad companies that you are in that mall and you might be interested to buy something. So let's give them an ad. But you never asked for that ad, right? You never consented for anyone to send you a message about an ad, sending you a proposal of buying something for 30% less, right? Facebook, right, had ethnic affinity ads, right? What do I mean by that? How would you feel if someone tries to sell you a beautiful coat, a suit, a jacket, because you are a Christian? How would it be if someone tries to sell me a white cap just because my name gives an indication that I am a Muslim? How would I feel if someone sells me a orange T-shirt because he figures out that I am Indian, I'm a Hindu, right? Now that is the kind of activities that most giants on the internet have done in the past. It was proved in the past in the code of law, and that was where the European Union got really serious about defining that how much is too much, right? What can you track? What can you not track? Before you track, what are the kind of permissions that you should take, right? And then came this entire concept that required privacy by design in applications. That there came in various requirements. Just imagine this. We went to many organizations, big banks, big banks. Imagine you going to a big bank. I'm sure many of you work for big enterprise, and ask that, if I ask you that, do you accept personal data from people? Their initial answer may be, oh no, we don't. And we ask them, so don't people apply with their resumes in your companies? And they say, yeah, they do. So is there personal information that they provide you? They say, yeah, they do. And don't you do marketing campaigns? Oh yes, we do that. And don't you send out emails to people about your products and services? Oh yes, we do that as well. So from where do you get those email IDs? And a box of worms start opening. What about your employees? Do you know the date of birth of every employee and their social security number? Yes, we do. And where do you store that? In the HRMS system. And who maintains that HRMS system for you? Oh, it has been outsourced to a third party. Oh, excellent. So you do collect personal data at multiple places. Your marketing teams collect personal data. Your hiring teams collect personal data. Your HR operations collect personal data. And would it be right to say that some of this personal data is even shared with third parties? And the answer might be yes, absolutely. That is the case. That is the world we all live in. That is the kind of complexities that organizations operate with, right? So there must be a framework for managing the privacy. So let us now spend some time understanding what does that mean and how does it look, right? So how the world has changed, right? This is an interesting slide. This is just a basic slide that tells that a few years back, right, when in 1995, European Union passed the first data protection directive, right? The world's population itself was 5 billion, right? And only 45 million internet users truly existed, right? There were only 91 million mobile subscribers. What has happened now? The same number in the past 20 years, or not even 20 years, right? Or we can say 20, 25 years, the 45 million has become close to 3 billion internet users, right? So you might have figured out that from 91 million mobile subscribers, today you are talking about, you know, you know, thousands of billions of internet enabled devices that include tabs, mobiles, that includes even geysers and electronic devices like washing machines, TVs, right? They can now be configured on internet. IoT is a big industry. You want to make sure that when you are back home, you find your clothes that are already washed, right? There are options and there are washing machines which are available, which you can access from your mobile phone and start them. And they will wash your clothes, they will dry your clothes, keep them ready by the time you are back, right? Having said that, we are trying to just give a sense of a big change in the way the world worked. And that needs us to be very, very conscious about privacy. Enterprises need to take privacy seriously. And there is no excuse for not complying with privacy regulations and privacy rules, right? Okay, so what is privacy? Privacy, the one of the best definitions of privacy that I have seen, there are many, right? Trust me on that, is it comes from the AICPA, which says that privacy encompasses the rights and obligations of individuals and organizations with respect to the collection, use, retention, disclosure, and disposal of personal information. So right from collection, you can see the complete life cycle, right? So it is about rights and obligations, drafted very much like how the Constitution is drafted. Just like we all have rights, but those rights are not unlimited, right? There are obligations which we have. We have to pay our taxes. We have to drive our cars from the left-hand side. If we are in India, we have to drive it from the right-hand side if we are in the US, and things like that. So privacy encompasses the rights and obligations of individuals, right? With respect to collection, the complete life cycle of personal information, right? So let us talk about GDPR, right? The General Data Protection Regulation, operates with an understanding that data collection and processing provides the basic engine that most businesses run on. Why do we say that? Just imagine, like, let's take an example of InfoSec training. Can it really function on its own without taking or collecting any information from anybody? No. It has to understand what kind of trainings you are interested in. It has to understand what your name is, first name, last name, maybe your address, maybe your phone number, because we need to connect with you, right? But it strives to protect that data every step of the way while giving the consumer ultimate control over what happens to it. What does this statement truly mean? Is something like this. I decide that I would like to take a training with InfoSec Train. Okay, I'm just considering InfoSec Train's example, not for any other reason, but because it would make things easier for you to understand the challenges. So when I wanted to take the training, I went to their website and I requested when is the next batch, right? And I was asked to provide some information like which type of training I am interested in, how many years of experience I have, what is my first and last name, what is my email ID, what is my phone number. So there is personal data collected, right? A business runs on that personal data. If you say that you are not comfortable providing that data, how would I even contact you to offer the best trainings, right? So the goal here is not to stop the business, but the goal here is to attest, to make InfoSec Train attest to the fact that the information, personal data that you provided to the firm is secure, it's managed responsibly, it's handled responsibly, and things like that, right? What we want to do is to make sure that in the end, it is you, the consumer, also called as data subject, right? I'm coming to this term called data subject, is the ultimate owner of the data. He is the most powerful entity. What do I mean by that? We want to make sure that data subjects have some rights, in the sense that after your training, if you believe that InfoSec Train must delete all the information they have about you, right? You should have the right to request that. And InfoSec Train should have, as an organization, an obligation to make sure that they respect your decision and they delete the data within acceptable times and acknowledge the fact that we do not have any more records about you. How much is the acceptable time here? The acceptable time, as per the regulators, is 30 days, right? So anywhere between 30 to 45 days, an organization should be able to basically fulfill the request of a data subject, right? That is the goal, right? Now, this is the complete life cycle that I just tried to explain with which GDPR operates, right? So let us talk about some industry regulations. In this section, I would talk about a lot of industry regulations, right? GDPR came up sometime in May 2018. They said that organization must comply with GDPR. Accordingly, many organizations went ahead with their first privacy programs. So just imagine how beautiful it is to be at the right place at the right time. We are, as cybersecurity professionals or privacy professionals, going through an era where for the first time organizations are trying to implement a program in itself, which is at its very initial stages, which is new to the world. Those who try to understand this subject well, those who try to make a career out of this, in the next 10 to 20 years, this will be a subject as big as cybersecurity. I'll talk about how cybersecurity relates to privacy as well, as some of you have indicated, and I have accordingly provided or made some slides also, right? So what was GDPR? It was based on strong data subject rights. What do we mean by data subject rights? Just like I explained a moment back, right to be forgotten. I have, as a data subject, the right to be forgotten. I can just write to anybody, Google, Facebook, anybody, and say, just forget me. Delete everything that you have about me, right? And GDPR basically is based on that strong right to the data subject, right? Included data protection officer as a mandatory role in organization. Now, are we talking here? Would you really not like to become the data protection officer for Facebook with $1 million salary? Wow, would definitely like to do that, right? But why would organizations create a new position called as data protection officer? Because now they have to comply with GDPR type of regulations that mandate that if you have an enterprise which has the following, type of a portfolio, it is mandatory for you to have a data protection officer. And it also describes very clearly what would be the roles and responsibilities of the data protection officer, right? Now, that makes privacy even more interesting. Why? Because let us think about cybersecurity regulation. Let us deviate from here, and in our minds, all of you quickly think about any cybersecurity regulation that you know about. FedRAMP or NYDFS, right? Or SOX. Does SOX say that you need to have a chief information security officer? I have not seen that clause. Yes, NYDFS now has said that you would like to have a CISO, but other than that, most regulations I could tell you does not mandate, right? Now, this is what is changing, right, in the industry. Now, it covered EU residents and data processing beyond Europe, resulting in a unique global regulation. Now, I could very clearly recall that 5 minutes back, and even at the beginning when I went to check your comments, there were many of you who had comments around this piece that who needs to comply with GDPR? Does Indian organizations also need to comply with GDPR? If yes, why? Right? We would be answering those questions in the next slides. So I won't spend too much of time on this particular point, right? And then covered stringent data breach notification requirements. What do we mean by this? In case you lose the personal data of people, it becomes now mandatory for you to be informing the authorities, right? Regulatory authorities that within 72 hours that there was a data breach in your organization, data leakage happened, someone just came and stole, critical data from your organization, right? And then there are more requirements, which I would take you through, walk you through, make you understand exactly how a regulation is drafted, how difficult it is to interpret that. I'm sure you would appreciate how we interpret regulatory requirement. I will give you demonstrations of that, right? And then we would also see that how do most privacy regulations now behave in this area, right? So let us look at our next regulation, CCPA. CCPA stands for California Consumer Protection Act. Again, very, very critical act. This is not a federal act. This is a state law. So GDPR was launched by the European Union, applicable for I would come to applicability of GDPR later. But CCPA as a regulation had said that if any organization is tracking information about residents of California, right, then they must comply with the law. Now, this law applies to every company processing personal information of Californians. Now, come on, who cares about And who might be processing the personal information of a state? It is like we saying that any organization trying to process personal information of people from Maharashtra or Karnataka, right? Here is the reality. California is a very, very important place on the face of planet Earth. The reason why is California is in itself fifth largest economy in the world. Almost every organization, right from LG to Google to you may not even think, maybe InfoSec Train, right, has processes personal data of people from California. I would be really surprised if InfoSec Train has never provided any training to people from California. That is the importance of that state. Just to let you know that it is a state which has less than 1 crore people, right? As compared to 130 crore people or consumers that India has. And India is nowhere close to being the fifth largest economy of the world, right? So that should give you a sense of how important this place is. California residents have the right to sue companies. Now look at the beauty of this regulation. Okay? It gives the data subject the right to sue a company that used their stolen data, right, or the data that was disclosed to them by a data breach. In addition, they can also sue companies that were negligent in handling of their data. What do I mean by that? Let us assume that, let us try to understand this better, okay? Let us assume that you went to a website, right? And you provided your personal data, you provided your address, or you provided your name, and you provided your age, right? And your interest areas, your hobbies, whatever. Okay, great. And before you provided, that company, brought up a beautiful note to you saying that this is a privacy notice. What is a privacy notice? A privacy policy of an organization is an internal document. When that privacy policy is exposed to a data subject on the website, it is called privacy notice. What information does a privacy notice provide? Privacy notice provides various informations like what would we do with your information? Why do we need why are we collecting your information? How would we protect your information? Which are the countries where we expect to send this information? Which are the third parties with whom we would share this information? How long would we retain this information? So next time, whenever you go to any website that is collecting your personal data, I would request you to read their privacy notice because it is a very interesting document which quickly brings out some interesting bullets that tell you that how that organization is going to handle your personal data, right? And there is a commitment that they will protect the data. And then you have two options. What is most important is you need to accept. That is, you need to opt in, right? When you opt in, you say, yes, you can, have my data. Excellent. And then there is a data breach in that organization, right? And someone stole the information, right? And whoever stole the information looked at your email address and sent you an email saying that I have a wonderful toothpaste to be sold to you. It will make your teeth become green, right? Generally, people may not like that idea of having green teeth, but just as an example, right? Now you have this option if you are a California resident to basically sue both the companies. One company for basically providing you with what we call as a privacy notice, where they told you that they will be protecting your information, which they did not. And you can also sue the company that basically stole the data from some company and tried to use that data to reach you. When you sue a company for doing this kind of a mistake, that it is not able to protect your personal data, right? That which it promised in the privacy notice when you opted in, and a company that misused that data, you can sue them for millions of dollars, and you would get that data, that amount, and you would get that money real fast, right? So please don't think that it would take you another 10 years to get that. Maybe in 3 months you will be a millionaire if anyone tries to do this. And that is the power that this regulation is bringing in. So would a company that is taking someone's personal data now be very, very careful about protecting it? Yes, absolutely, because it knows that now the most powerful entity is the data subject, and it can sue the company for misusing its information, right? Or for using it for ad campaigns without taking a consent, right? That is, I'm sure for those of you who might have studied privacy as a subject, you know that there is a lot of focus now on consent, right? That is what we mean by consent, right? Excellent. Let us now talk about a very interesting regulation, Indian personal data protection. After many, many years of deliberation, India came up with its first, personal data protection bill that applies to both government agencies and private entities, even those not present within the territory. So it is again a very much a global regulation. We will talk about what is meant by a global regulation and how it is enforced, right? Organizations will need to store at least one copy of the personal data on a server or at a data center located in India. Now, imagine, let us try to look at this requirement practically, okay? What we are trying to say is, there is a bank, let's say in UAE, right? And in this bank, right, let us assume that this bank takes in a lot of information from people. This bank does great business, very good. And Indian people have opened an account, right? Now that bank is mandated to have a copy of the personal data on a server located in India. The bank says, why? Bank says, why? What's the problem if I've kept that data in Alaska? Because the world is on the internet. If you need access to that data, Indian government needs access to that data, we are comfortable to provide that access to them because it's all on the internet. We are connected, right? The bigger challenge that happens with organizations is they have invested very, very heavily on cloud transformation engagements. What do I mean by that? There are cloud service providers like AWS, like Azure, like Google Cloud, IBM Cloud, that allows you to upload your data onto the cloud, right? Although you can, when you upload, for those of you who might be cloud engineers here or may have exposure to cloud, you would know that all that you could control is the region in which the information will be hosted, right? So imagine that I'm selecting a region called Europe, right, for hosting my information. Now that might not be sufficient if I'm capturing any personal data of people from India. I must now replicate that information to a server or a data center in India. Now that means extra cost that I have to bear, right? The bigger challenge is the bill forbids organizations from transferring or storing sensitive personal data and critical personal data. It has defined those categories overseas. And many organizations have sent a lot of emails to the Indian government asking for further clarifications that how could a business run, a global business run, if it does not send data across borders? Just like people from UAE or US have joined on their Friday morning this session, right? They may provide sensitive information or data to InfoSec Train because that is the mode of business, global mode of business. Indians, in the same way, like to send a lot of their data to America or Europe, which is 53% of Indian economy. Indian economy is very much dependent on the US or the Europe, right? Or the Australia or the UAE. So we have to basically send information to them. An example of that might be if I am joining a bank from the Middle East, I'm joining the offshore delivery center, but my information, my HR information, my age, my preferences of my insurance and things like that, I may have to send to the bank's headquarters in Dubai, right? Now, how could a bill forbid organizations from transferring or storing sensitive personal data? It is definitely sensitive data that I'm sending overseas, that is outside of India. So there are a lot of questions with Indian personal data protection bill, which are yet to be answered, which are in the process of being clarified and rectified if required. And in any case, in India, the biggest challenge has never been the bills. We have a lot of bills which are passed. The bigger challenge is always implementation of these bills on the ground, right? So that is a question, that how would these be implemented on ground and how would they be audited? Who would audit, right? And what kind of penalties would be applied to companies like Google, right, who has sensitive personal data of Indians in US, right? We need to see those things in the coming future. But yes, I wanted to bring it to your notice real quick that all these bills and regulations are 500-page documents. Feel free to download them. They are available on the internet and you can read them. But I have tried to, in a single slide, bring up the key issues associated with each one of them for discussion here. And that is the intent with which I am trying to come here, is to bring in the practical experience that I have in the space, that what are the challenges, what are the trends, right? As you might have figured out from the name of this session, New Zealand privacy bill, very similar problem, right? The New Zealand's privacy bill is set to replace the outdated Privacy Act that was passed 25 years ago. Just imagine the maturity of a country like New Zealand that had a privacy bill 25 years ago, just like Europe, right? That had a data protection directive 25 years ago in 1995. I'm sure we were not even thinking about it because in 1995, I was growing up in a small town. I was in school and I had to go more than a mile to access internet in an internet cafe. There was no question of having internet at my home, right? At that time, there were countries that were drafting privacy bills. Okay, the bill doesn't address its application to overseas business that collect data on New Zealanders. Now, New Zealand's privacy bill has a completely opposite problem to Indian privacy bill. Why? Because New Zealand privacy bill does not really address its application to overseas business. What do I mean? That if I am a company called, let's say, TCS, and I collect information from people of New Zealand, do I need to comply with this regulation from New Zealand? It's not yet clear, right? What is the applicability of this regulation to, overseas business? Still needs to be seen, right? The bill introduces new criminal offenses, which is a strong point of this bill. That means in case someone breaches your privacy, right, you can basically file a criminal offense. What is the importance of filing a criminal offense? The importance of filing a criminal offense is the fact that if you've filed a criminal offense, you can go ahead and make sure that people are sent to jail. In most other offenses, there are codification, right, of the regulation. Like in India, we have penal codes. Like you are booked under Article 302 for a murder, right? Why? Because it's a criminal offense. What could happen? You can your freedom could be taken away from you and you can go to jail. For something that is a non-criminal, which is a civil kind of a dispute, maybe you are having with your brother for getting a share in the house made by your father, it's a civil case, right? It's not a criminal offense to basically be suing anybody and things like that. No one of the two parties ever goes to a jail, right? So that is the importance that New Zealand's privacy bill now has introduced new criminal offenses, right? So having said all of this, before I move further and jump into some very important parts, right, of what is, you know, the data subjects, what are the terminologies, and as I said, most of this data is not available on the internet. This is like a practical experience that I have tried to capture in the next 10 slides. The GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation, privacy, EU regulation, ensuring consistent and high level protection of the rights and freedoms of EU individuals. It is not true that you need to be in US or European Union to basically have rights and freedom. But this regulation is focused on protection of rights and freedom of EU individuals and the use of their personal data. And it replaces the Data Protection Directive of 1995. It has some important parts, like European Union goods or services, right? What does that mean? What I want to say there is, this is only applicable to any organization that offers goods or services to the subjects, data subjects in the European Union. We will be talking about personal data, that is the data that can identify directly or indirectly a natural person. I would need to provide some clarifications on this part. The reason behind that is until recently, until 3-4 years back, personal data was data, two pieces of data, like your first name, last name, along with your email address, or along with your street address, that could identify you. All those old definitions of personal data are gone now, okay? Any data that can identify you directly or indirectly, Shashank Roy, I understand there might be 100,000 Shashank Roys in this world, but Shashank Roy is personal data, period, right? Because it can indirectly bring down the scope of this world of 3.2 trillion people to those 100 people. Shashank Roy is one of, right? Now, data subjects. Everyone, each one of us is a data subject. Right? This is a very important terminal. If you want to practice privacy, if you want to implement privacy, if you want to understand privacy, make this a part of your DNA, okay? Every employee is a data subject. Every customer is a data subject, right? Every vendor is a data subject, right? So let us talk about personal data definition, right? There are two types of data. Every regulation talks about two types of personal data. One is non-sensitive personal data, which is in some regulations, like the Indian regulation, it's just called personal data. And the other one is sensitive personal data, right? So I have tried to create one slide where I have tried to say this type of information is considered to be non-sensitive personal data, and the other type is considered to be sensitive personal data. Anything related to my health is sensitive personal data. My ethnic origin, I should never be asked whether I am, of what ethnicity, ethnic background, right? Criminal record, religion, right? Politics, trade unions, all of these are sensitive personal data. Whereas, my home, my work, my profession, my IP address, are even my IP address, for that sense, is a non-sensitive personal data. So what do I mean by that? See, what I mean by that is, if I have a live IP address, which I type on this screen and everyone of you get to see it, then what has happened here is, I would say that it is, if that IP address is associated with me and it could identify me, it is personal data, right? Now, what happens on ground? In practicality, for those of you who come from technical backgrounds would know, there are two types of IP addresses: public IP address and private IP address. I often get this question when I'm sitting in the boardrooms, that do our private IP addresses are those IP addresses that are of a particular range, like 10 range in class A, 172 range in class B, and 192 range in class C. I don't want to get into the details of or technicalities of networking here, but the point is, for an organization, the question is, are these IP addresses considered to be personal IP address? The answer is, if there is any way in which, on the basis of this IP address, you can identify the individual, then it is personal data. And let me tell you that in the code of law, it has already been proved that yes, an individual could be successfully identified, by virtue of IP addresses, even private IP addresses. Why? Even if a DHCP server allocates this IP address, it is always possible to identify to which system this IP address has been allocated to and who owns that system. And that way, we can identify the individual who basically has this IP address. And when we say this, or when we talk about this, all that we say is, yes, this IP address would be considered as personal data, right? So what is a general data? Data in an organization's greatest source of value and its greatest source of risk. Why is it the greatest source of value? Just like what we have been talking about all this while, InfoSec cannot do business unless it has data with it. That data would be all type of data, right? It's presentations, it's knowledge base, it's information about people, everything is data, right? And personal data, under GDPR, personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, right? We have spoken about this, right? Now, let us get into the meatier stuff. I know that there is a lot of confusion, amongst people, amongst organizations, that is GDPR applicable to us, right? Do we need to comply with GDPR? If yes, do I need to have mandatorily a position created for data privacy officer? Now, how do I scope a regulation? This is just for an example, okay? I've picked this up as GDPR, and I've created a process flow view for all of you to understand that how an enterprise, whenever a new regulation comes, right, identifies that whether this regulation is applicable to. I know there were people even initially during this session who were sending in various comments saying that, do people need to comply with GDPR when they are in the EU? Do they need to comply with GDPR even if they are not in EU? Do Indian companies need to comply with GDPR? This slide is the ultimate answer to all those questions. I've used this in the board level meetings of various organizations, right? And this is a practical way of how we arrive or we conclude whether an organization has to comply to a regulation or not. Let's not talk about only GDPR, okay? But let's take this as an example of GDPR. The first question we ask is, does the organization process personal data of any individual? If the answer is no, then the organization is not subject to GDPR. But if you recall, in the initial section or the initial part of this discussion itself, I had explained that it is fairly improbable to run a company without processing personal data of an individual. I'll just pause here to clarify one more item. What do I mean by processing personal data? I'm just accessing someone's date of birth or date of joining. Am I processing it? Yes. Even accessing someone's date of birth, his first and last name, his address is processing. Let's get this very clear. Okay. So I have never come across any organization answering a no to the first question. Okay. So the answer has to be yes, because if you have people in your firm, if you work with people and not with robots, if you are not working for a secluded zoo that doesn't have anyone other than animals, your answer cannot be no to this question, right? You must be processing personal data of any individual. Okay. Is the organization based in the EU? Let us start think about a Deutsche Bank, in based out of EU, the London Bank, any organization. I generally talk about banks because I come from financial sector and even healthcare sector. It's the same story, right? Is the organization based in the EU? If the answer to this question is yes, then the organization directly is subjected to GDPR. Okay. Now, I've started my small startup in India, where I would be selling pickles, right? But to everybody in the world. I have a website, people can order from the website, and I'm just taking a use case. I'm just creating a story, okay? So the first question for my company, does the organization process personal data of any individual? Yes, people do buy pickles from my firm online. I have a few stores in Bangalore. People love my pickle, right? And yeah, even during lockdown, they come out and buy pickle. So and government allows me to run my grocery store, so I'm very happy. Great. My first answer to my first question is yes. Okay. Is the organization based in the European Union? No, I said it's a Bangalore-based startup. Okay. Let us go to the other side of the flow. Is the organization based outside the EU? The answer is yes. Okay. So we would move on to the next question. Does the organization's processing activities relate to offering of goods or services to EU residents? Now, this, just hear me out very patiently, okay? Because this is $1 million question that every organization wants to know the answer of. That my website is on the internet, which means the organization's processing activities relates to offering of goods and services to EU residents, because someone from Germany or UK or Argentina or France, can they buy my pickle? The answer is a yes, because they can access my website. So now, do I need to comply with GDPR? The answer is a no. I will tell you why. If I can demonstrate that I am not focusing my product, which is a pickle, to be marketed in the EU, in Germany, in France, then I could very much say that people accessing my website and purchasing things from my website, even people from EU, is just coincidental. I am not offering my goods or services specifically targeting the Germans or people from Argentina or France. So when would I be proved wrong? If my website has a German page trying to sell pickle to people in Germany, or if it has a page in French for people of France offering them pickles in France, then definitely I am in scope of GDPR and I have to comply with GDPR, right? If the answer to this question is no, my website is a global website, it's in English, I'm not specifically focusing my products or services for the EU, people, then the next question is, does the organization monitor the behavior of EU residents? Like location tracking, by tracking where are they going, not going, right? their online profiling. What do they like to buy? Not buy. Oh no, I'm a simple pickle seller based out of Bangalore, very much a Bangalorean. I have a website. People from all over the world can buy it, right? If someone from EU buys it in a euro by paying a euro, it is his wish. But I am not advertising my products specifically in Europe, right? Then I don't need to comply with GDPR. I'm not subjected to GDPR at all. If I'm not tracking, monitoring their behaviors, nothing, no, right? Now, one of the important things that I would like to again bring to everyone's notice is the fact that what do we mean by a data subject being in Europe, right? Let's try to get to the other side of it and get this very clear in our minds and in our understanding. Because the day you start understanding interpretation of a regulation, privacy regulation, right? The world would be on your side. You would have a great career in privacy. Now, imagine this, that someone from Germany comes to India, right? And he is trying to buy my pickle at my store and pay me in euros, right? And he's trying to fill a form of feedback for my pickles. Then am I subject to GDPR? Or does that person have the rights that GDPR provides, like right to be forgotten? Can he then ask me to delete all his records, from my system? The answer is a no, because one of the important aspects of GDPR is GDPR says that GDPR is a regulation for data subjects in the EU. In the EU does not mean that you are a person from EU. What I mean to say is I could be an Indian or a Pakistani sitting in the European Union, and I would have all the rights that GDPR talks about as a data subject, right? So I can send a note to Facebook and say, as per GDPR, I have the right for asking you to let me know who are the parties with whom you share my information. And Facebook has to provide you with that data. Why? Because as a data subject, you are physically in the European Union. It doesn't matter what your nationality is, right? At the same time, if someone who is a European national, a German or French, who is traveling to the US or Singapore or to India, tries to say that since he is a European national, he has the right, that GDPR gives him as a data subject, it may not be correct, because GDPR as a regulation is very much focused on physical presence of an individual or a data subject in the European Union, right? Although there is a lot of debate on this that goes in. Whatever I said in the last 5 minutes, you can hold that as the the point of truth. Now, does an organization need to appoint a data privacy officer, a data protection officer, right? A DPO? The answer is, again, we drew out a few very simple workflow questions for an organization. And trust me, I go for a $3 million client with the same workflow that you are looking at on the screen. A consultant from McKinsey, from a Big Four audit firm, does exactly this. And this is the kind of discussion we have with the board when we try to evaluate whether the organization is within the scope of GDPR or not, and whether they need to hire a DPO by paying a hefty salary, right, to a new role and create a new department. I will come to that later. So here are the questions we ask. Are the organization's core processing activities carried out by a public authority or body, except judicial body? Generally, many organizations' answers to this question is a no, right? Then we ask the next question. Does the organization's core processing activities require regular and systematic monitoring of individuals on a large scale? On a large scale means 50,000 records per minute. And most organizations from Visa to Google to Facebook say a yes. If their answer is a yes, then they need to appoint a DPO. The third question we ask them, are the organization's core processing activities carried out on special categories of personal data on a large scale? And when we ask this question to a big firm, a big bank, on a large scale, you remember the personal categories, right? The sensitive personal data. Do you have information about health of people, about their political background or affinity, their criminal records, their religion, right? If you have that kind of information and you basically access that information or you process that information, then as an organization, you need to appoint a DPO. And this is coming in directly from the regulations. We can point you directly to the articles of GDPR that specifies these two workflows. These workflows are coming out of those articles. And so what I've done is in the next slides, I've brought in the articles to just showcase how difficult it is to interpret those articles and how badly written those articles are, right? And hear from you if you guys are now completely clear, not only about GDPR, but how do you scope a regulation of whether it applies to your organization or not, whether it applies to a company or not, whether it applies to a firm or not, and are you comfortable with what an organization does? Now, if anyone asks you that, is GDPR applicable to Indian companies? Is it applicable for a US-based company? Why is GDPR becoming a global regulation? Do you have answers to all those questions? If I am a TCS, if I am selling my goods and services to the people of Europe, I am required to comply with GDPR, period, right? If I am processing, if I have an office in the Europe, I have to comply with GDPR, any of my branch office, right? If I am processing personal data of people in the Europe, then I have to comply with GDPR, right? If I am monitoring behavior of EU residents, I have to comply with GDPR. But at the same time, if the goods and services that I'm selling, if the data that I'm collecting from European people, or they're paying on my website, if my goods and services are not targeted at the people of Europe and it is just coincidental, I don't need to comply with GDPR. That is the crux of this slide, right? Let us now talk about some key terms associated with privacy, not just GDPR, okay? In privacy, there is a concept of a data controller, and there is a concept of a data processor. These are diagonally opposite to each other. Accordingly, they have been laid out on this slide, okay? Now, let us get talking, okay, about a data controller first. Who is a data controller? Who is a data processor? I went to a gaming company a few years back, and they told me $1 billion gaming company. Okay, they are now doing research on virtual reality games and things like that, right? And they said that we want to understand: are we data controllers or are we data processors? Right? Very important to understand who is a data controller. A data controller is an organization or individual with the authority to decide how and why data relating data subjects is to be processed. Now, this is how you work with a data controller. This is when you become a data controller. Okay, let me go back to my layman terms examples to talk about when an organization becomes data controller, right? A data controller is any organization. Let us say that I start a company, okay? Again, my same pickle company where I make awesome pickle, world-class pickle. I need to collect information directly from the data subjects, okay? Why? Who are these data subjects? These data subjects are my employees. My business is growing. I need 10 more hands that can cut, the green chilies with which I will make pickles, pickles. I love chili pickles, by the way. So the problem here is these people, right, who are going to cut those chilies for me, they have provided me with their first name, their last name, their family details, because I'm going to provide them some kind of an insurance for their families. Lot of stuff, interesting stuff we do for employees, right? We must. I have become a data controller. Why? Because I directly collected information from those people. From the who are people? People are data subjects. Excellent. You can see on the left-hand side, a natural person about whom data is being processed. God has made us natural people. A natural person is what he is called. In legal terms, all of us are natural persons. Doesn't matter how unnatural we may behave, but yeah, we are all natural persons, and so we are data subjects as per the legal definition. Now, data controller, what a data controller is anybody who directly interacts with the data subjects is a data controller. Who is a data processor? So I took this data, and you remember I just a moment back said that I'm going to get insurance for these people, my employees, right? So I went to an insurance company and said that, hey, I want to make sure that if they fall sick, their family persons get sick, they must get 3 lakh rupees, right? They must get covered for up to 3 lakh rupees. And I handed over that detail of their families, their names, their marital status, their age, their sex, everything to the insurance company. That is gonna process that information, but they are gonna process that information on behalf of the data controller, that is me, the pickle company. So the insurance company became, in this scenario, there are other scenarios also where someone logs into an insurance company's website and buys insurance, in which case, since the data subject is directly interacting with that insurance provider directly becomes the data controller. Okay, let's not confuse. In this scenario, I was the data controller because I collected the information from the data subject and I handed over that information to that insurance company, right? And that is the reason why the insurance company became data processor and I became data controller. What else can I bring in as a real-time example for you? And why is it so important? The reason is, remember at the beginning where we discussed the definition of privacy, we said privacy is composed of 2 parts, rights and obligations. The obligations, right, for a data processor are different than that of a data controller. What do I mean by that? How can I explain that better? In case of a data breach, it becomes the data controller's responsibility to inform the regulatory authority within 72 hours. What do I mean by this? Read between the lines. The regulation says it is the responsibility of the data controller to inform the regulatory authority about a data breach within 72 hours. It is not the responsibility of the data processor, period. So the data processor's responsibility is to inform the data controller in case he has somehow managed to lose the personal data that it got from the data controller. It is not the data processor's responsibility to reach out to the regulatory authority, right? And there are many other such examples where the data controller naturally has much, much more in terms of his obligations with which he has to live with, right? So trust me, this is very, very important with privacy. Anyone who wants to make a career in privacy or implement privacy cannot do that unless he understands whatever we said in the past 15 minutes or 20 minutes, right? Now, let me give you one more example. I want to spend sufficient time on this, right? I went to a gaming company. They said, Shashanko, please first tell us. We know with your discussions, your first session, that we need to comply with GDPR, right? Now tell us whether we are data controller and data, or we are data processor. We asked him, what do you do? He said, we make machines in the casinos. I'm sure you guys must have gone to casinos, right? You won't believe me. I went to casinos only once in Goa, right? And I loved those machines, right? So they made those. That company made those casino machines, right? So the question was, were they directly collecting any information? So we asked them that, do you sell those casino machines to Europe, and do you have existence in Europe? They said, oh, Europe is our big market, right? For those of you who might be in UK or in Europe, know, right, that in Europe, casinos are a big business. Okay. So even though the company was a US company, and I was consulting for them in the US, where I was based out of Boston, this company had to comply with GDPR because this company had one of its offices in Europe, and it did very focused marketing for their products. Their product was casino machines, which they were trying to sell across Europe's casinos in the Europe, very much in scope of GDPR. But the question is whether they are data controllers or they are data processors, right? The answer is they are both. We'll tell you why. For the players, right? The players are coming and playing games on their casino machines, but they are not directly, either purchasing those machines or providing any of their personal data to them. They are providing their personal data to the casino owners, as a result of which, for their business, they are data processors. At no point in time, a user or a data subject directly interacts with this company, right? He has to go to a casino and provide his details to the casino and play games in the casino, which means the casino becomes the data controller in this scenario. And this gaming company that only manufactures the software and the hardware that it sells to the casinos become a data processor. Excellent. Now there is one more question. I just said that it also becomes data controller, right? Was I wrong in saying that? Is it getting too late in the night? No. I'm still awake, and I hope all of you are. The important point to note here is, you remember this firm also had an existence in terms of their office in Europe, and there were employees in Europe that it employed who provided their family details and their degree certificates and their address proofs to this company directly. So for all of its employees in the Europe, this company is a data controller. But from business perspective, this company is a data processor. So could an organization be data controller and a data processor at the same time? Generally, that is the case always, right? And who is a supervisory authority? It is the entity that is going to come and audit you, right? It is the company that is going to fine you if you are not found to be non-compliant, right? So these are the key terms in the privacy world. If you have understood this, I would like to hear a quick shout out from all of you. And let me go to the next slide and talk about consequences of non-compliance, right? So there was a joke. We went and we provided a proposal to a client that wanted to comply with the privacy regulation, and it wanted to not just comply with the privacy regulation, it wanted to seriously implement our privacy program, by its very essence. So I was telling you a story. The story is, when we went to the client wanted to implement a privacy program, and they wanted to know how much will it cost, how many resources will be required from a consulting firm that has done it at other clients of its size, and how many people would it need to hire in the privacy team, which they planned to just set up. And we gave them a roadmap, and we gave them a budget of close to $10 million. And they were like, implementing a privacy program is for compliance is so expensive, and we had one of our partners who previously used to be a regulator. He said, if you feel that compliance is very expensive, try non-compliance. And everyone in the room burst into laughter because non-compliance in today's world is much, much more expensive than compliance, right? What I mean by that is, if a supervisory authority comes to do a GDPR audit in your organization, and it finds that you are non-compliant, right? It can fine you up to 4% of your global turnover. I'm not saying it can fine you 4% of turnover of a country. I'm not saying it will fine you 4% of your profits. For those of you who come from business backgrounds, you may know that an organization generally only operates at 20% profits, right? So if I take over, imagine you are doing 100 rupees business of which you make a profit of 20 rupees. If I take away 4 rupees from you, as your annual turnover is 100 rupees, right? Or even worse, if you do 100 rupees worth of a business in a country, right? And you make 20 rupees as profit, but you exist in multiple countries and your global turnover is 1,000 rupees, how would it be if I charge you 4% of that 1,000 rupees, right? So I will be charging you 40 rupees, whereas in that country, you only made 20 rupees, right? So it's complex, but know very clearly that supervisory authorities are already submitting big fines to Google's, Facebook's, Microsoft's of the world, right? And on top of that, the data subjects are taking these companies and many other companies to the court, right? And organizations are fined every day. If you want to know more about it, I have set up some case studies, but you can also go to nimity.com and see a lot of these real-time practical case studies of which organization, which day is fined how much. It keeps updating every day, right? Like every week you get last week's done, right? And news. Now, what are data processing principles? Lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Now, this again, don't look at it from GDPR point of view. This are across regulations. This is how you set up a privacy program, right? These are the principles on the basis of which a privacy program is set up in an organization, right? Lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. That is, processing is based on legitimate grounds. If I'm asking you your home address, there has to be a reason why I need to know your home address. If I'm a training company that is going to provide training on internet, right, like this, and I'm going to send you an email invoice, and you are anyways going to pay online, what is the need for me to know your address? None, right? So processing is based on legitimate grounds. Purpose limitation. There has to be a purpose. Data must only be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purpose. It should not be collected for any other reason, right? Data minimization. I should only collect as much of personal data as is required. If for providing your training, I don't really need you to know your age, right? Or whether you are married or not. How is it even relevant to me? How many kids you have, right? I should not collect that information from you, right? Accuracy. Collected data must be accurate and kept up to date. Why? Because this information, when you are holding it, you have to make sure that you can, in case the government or the regulatory authorities or the law enforcement bodies, police comes and asks, do you know this person's phone number, right? It has to be accurate. You need to provide the complete details to them. Storage limitation. Data must be retained only as long as necessary. Easy to say as a principle, very difficult to achieve on ground. As I promised you at the beginning of this session, that this session is not just gonna be a few slides here and there being thrown at you, but rather this session is aimed at providing you with more, right? Practical exposure to what happens on ground. I have an example for you. Someone went to a website of Amazon. Amazon is a very happening company. For some reason, everyone wants to work in Amazon. You know? When I came back from US and joined a bank in Bangalore, everyone is calling me and asking, why didn't you join Amazon? I was like, what's so fascinating about Amazon? Yeah, nothing against that firm. It's a great firm to work with, but why is everyone so keen on working with Amazon? So what you generally do, for an example, is you log in, right, to a website. You go to their careers or a section, and you provide your, let's say, resume, right? It has a lot of both personal and sensitive personal, right? Excellent. What happens then? The HR downloads, HR of Amazon downloads, or any company, XYZ. Let me not take this example only on one organization. They download, right, the resume that you might have submitted, and they look at the content, right, and they feel that you are a good fit for a role that they have, for an open position. What do? They take down your resume, they attach it to an email and send it to the hiring manager, right? Saying that, hey, would you like to interview this candidate? He has applied on our website and he wants to work with us. Excellent. What does the manager do? The hiring manager sends it downstream to one of his colleagues or one of the team members or team leaders, saying that, hey, do you think this is the kind of individual you are looking for? He says, yeah, let's interview him. Everyone get into a call. And they don't select the candidate. They find him not to be too good. Example. Let that not happen with any candidate. It's heartbreaking, right? But let's say that it happened. So then the question is that data subject next month sends a note out to that firm saying that I interviewed with you last month. Do you mind telling me all the IT systems where you store my data, right? Or let's take another example. Could you please delete my data? All right. The question is, from where? Because this is what happened. Even if I delete the data from the repository or the table where that website where you submitted that resume to, that resume's a local copy was downloaded by the HR, right? So you may have to go to the HR and say, make sure that you delete the resume of this person from your laptop. She says, why? Because this data subject has enacted his data subject right, and he wants his data to be deleted, right? Or let us take another example where our privacy notice promised that we would not store data beyond a year. So now the year has finished, and so we are deleting his data from our table. If you have a local copy, please delete it. And at that point, the HR may or may not even remember that who all did she send a local copy of that file to. And most interestingly, the manager and the team leader who had a copy on their desktop got it backed up on a tape, which is not online. And one of the image of their laptop is on cloud with a third party, right? And now is the requirement to identify this particular individual's information and delete it from everywhere where it was hosted in your organization. Or within 1 year, like after 1 year, it should not be there in the tape. So you have to go to the tape, load the tape, and make sure that the data is deleted. You have to go to the cloud service provider, make sure you delete that data from there. You have to make sure that it is gone from everyone's laptop's local copy and local drives. How would you achieve that? Are there technical solutions right now? The answer is no. Although we know many organizations have created different type of data discovery tools. And this is where I would go to a question. I would apologize. I don't know who asked that question, but someone of you asked at the beginning of this session that what is the difference between structured data and unstructured data? This is the perfect example. I didn't answer that question purposely because I wanted to answer it here, that when you store the data in tables, in databases, in tables, that is called structured data. It is always easy to scan because there are a lot of tools available to discover data in a database and delete it or do anything, right? Unstructured data, on the other hand, is like files which are stored on SharePoint or on a shared drive or on your hard drive, or it is extremely difficult to discover data from there. Although there are some leading AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning based products which are now coming into the market specifically to do this. They do nothing else. They just enable a company to discover data, right? Wherever there is personal data, it would tell both from structured data and unstructured data that there is personal data stored here, go and delete it, right? One such solution or tool is to questions that I saw is from a module that comes in from OneTrust. OneTrust is a technical solution or a product. I'm not providing a technical demo here of the product because that is not the intent of this session. But yes, for those of you who are interested, could get a free trial from them or get a free demo from them. They are a great team, and they can show you how their solution or product can go and search through both structured and unstructured data stores to identify personal data, right? Every organization that claims compliance with GDPR will get exposed or is expected to get exposed if they are not having good data discovery practices in their organization, because it is fairly improbable that a big enterprise as of today knows every corner, every system in their enterprise network where personal data is stored, right? So anyone claiming GDPR's compliance is their view about being compliant, but there could always be non-compliance which could be found, right? So I know some people initially had this view that every organization in India is GDPR compliant. I would say every organization is trying to be GDPR compliant, right? And that is the purpose of not just GDPR compliant. I want to be Indian IT Act compliant. I want to be Singapore's privacy law compliant. I want to be CCPA compliant. I want a very strong privacy program. It's not about, let me not just be driven by regulations and compliance. Let me driven by the essence of doing the right things, right? Personal data is an important element. Having a privacy program is very essential for my organization. And trust me, I got the privilege of working for firms where their DPOs told me that I'm not going to have two set of rules, one for data subjects from the Europe and one for data subjects from India. For me, data subject is a data subject. Let me respect their right, and we will treat them equally. If an Indian says that, could you please delete my data because I have I want right to be forgotten. If it is a legitimate request, I will go ahead and delete his data exactly like how I would delete the data from someone from Europe who is based out of Europe, right? Important thing in this conversation for you to understand is, and for everyone to understand is, the person from India doesn't have, truly speaking, any legal right to get his data deleted, because there is no regulation that governs him, to say that he has been given this right to request for deletion, to be right to be forgotten. If you are in Europe, then yes, you have that right because GDPR gave you that right as a data subject. Now imagine an American company, right, getting one request from someone from Europe and someone from India, right, about his right to be forgotten. And the question here is, how would they treat these two individuals? Would they treat them differently? Would within 45 days it will delete the data, right? The best way to test yourself out is create an account with any of the leading social media giant and then request for deletion of your account. I can tell you my example. My Facebook account has not yet been deleted. It has been over a year. But and I requested for its deletion from India. If I would have requested that from some other country, maybe my request would have been treated differently, because then I would have had the right to sue the company if it does not acknowledge and if it does not delete my data as I am requesting as a data subject. This is what I would like you to understand from where the world stands today practically, how enterprises are treating data subjects, and what is the end goal. Where is this world going? This world is going towards organizations starting to treat data subjects equally. That is where we would end up in the next 5 to 10 years, right? And every organization in the world will have a privacy program, just like they have their cybersecurity program or information security programs, right? That is where we would end up. And that is where privacy will play a huge role for organizations, for businesses, and for individuals, right? Now, let us look at some of the key GDPR elements, right? The reason I'm covering this is because there is no other regulation that covers items in such comprehensive way like GDPR, okay? So GDPR has documented its various requirements across 100 articles, 99, I would say. And then it has some recitals. For those of you who are familiar with how regulations are drafted and how the regulatory worlds work, you guys will be very keen or very interested to know this is the world we live in, right? So these are, you can say, the domains of those 100 articles. I've tried here to group them into 10 main subjects. Now, any regulation, privacy regulation in the world, or any privacy program that an organization wants to implement, if it implements this one slide, it will be GDPR compliant, it will be CCPA compliant, it will be Indian privacy regulation compliant, and many more, right? And it would have a strong privacy program. Okay. So having said that, let us try to look at extraterritorial scope and reach, right? GDPR has far-reaching extraterritorial impact to any organization targeting EU residents to offer goods and services. We have discussed this topic or this point in enough depth, and I'm sure all of you confirmed also that you understood this clear. Personal data scope. GDPR extends the definition of personal data. Any information that directly or indirectly identifies a natural person. We covered this also very clearly, right? Cross-border transfer. Now, this needs me to spend a couple of minutes. That what is cross-border transfers, right? Now, imagine, as I said, that in various examples which I took, I had a company or a sister concern in Europe. I had one in US. That is the way corporates work. That is the way every organization works, right? Now, for me to send this data from European citizens to US, right? Of European citizens to US, there is a cross-border transfer of data, right? Data controller needs to know all the data processors that the organization may be using to process personal data. Having said this, what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that all cross-border transfers must be governed by a contract. So there is something that we have called as different types of contracts on the basis of which data could be transferred between two countries. And as privacy professionals, we generally take help of our legal departments, right? And they help us draft something called as SCC, right? Standard contractual clauses, on the basis of which data transfer between two countries happen. So can I send my data to the US? Can data from US come to India? Can data from Europe come to? No. Data from Europe cannot come to India or to US unless there is a proper SCC drafted, right? That is what is called as a legal instrument for transferring data, cross-border transfers, right? So those of you who want to do further research on it can do it. For those of you from legal background, I would just like to quickly pause and check if we have anybody from with legal background here. If yes, I would request you to just ping me your name or data. And Gururaj, you're talking about Nimiti. Yes, Nimiti is a big source of privacy information for us. It provides a tool also, Trustar. It provides us privacy framework. It provides us sample privacy policies. It provides us sample privacy notices. So if you are a web-based company and you are wondering that what all should be covered in my privacy notice, just close your eyes and go to Nimiti, NYMITY, right? .org, and you will get all the world's best knowledge base in this website. So thanks a lot for calling that out, Gururaj. So I don't think we have anyone from in this session at this point in time from legal background, so no worries. But I often get this question that is it easier for people from legal background or more valuable for people from legal background to be in privacy? The answer might be yes, because privacy teams have to work very closely with legal teams. The reason behind that is exactly this fact that for things like cross-border transfers and things like that, we guys need, right, to know how contractual clauses work, right? Talking about accountability, organizations must establish clear roles and responsibilities for privacy. Accountability and mechanisms for enforcement, including documentation of evidence. If an organization cannot demonstrate the roles and responsibilities of its employees with regards to privacy, if it cannot demonstrate, so I'm sure that many of you working in corporates must have gone through the mandatory privacy trainings, right? The reason behind that is GDPR, right? It has mandated that there has to be trainings. And the best part is it has not directly mandated that through an article. It has included that in the roles and responsibilities of a DPO, that his responsibility would be to ensure that everyone in the organization has gone through a training. That is a privacy training. Then data protection officer, organizations may need to assign and empower a data protection officer who steers GDPR related compliance. Again, I believe we have spent enough time in understanding that which type of organization needs a DPO. If I'm a pickle selling shop, even in Europe, right, I may not need to hire a DPO, right? I may have to comply with GDPR. That is a different story, right? But I may not have to hire a DPO unless I meet those three parameters which I spoke about in the previous session or section. Data privacy rights, right? This is by far the strongest part of a privacy program. As I was talking more about it, I get very emotional talking about it because how powerful privacy program has made a data subject, that is you and me, right? We can ask an organization to give us access to my personal data, right to access. I can ask a company to forget me. I can ask the company to provide me with information of all the third parties with which it shares my data, right? Things like this makes a data subject very strong. And if you remember, in the beginning of the session, I said the goal of privacy program is to give the ultimate right or power to the data subject or the consumer. How? Through the data subject rights, right? Privacy by design and default, right? Incorporate personal data protection requirements in all new process and system development and design efforts. What do we mean by this? Our SDLC, software development life cycle, now needs to change, right? I could just tell you that there are n number of questions in various exams. If you are preparing for CISA, Certified Information Systems Auditor, if you are preparing for CISM, Certified Information Systems Manager, if you are preparing for CISSP, as I said, because we have been observing this very closely. there are a lot of questions that are testing people on their understandings of the same concepts, right? Now, what is privacy by design and default, and why is it so important? What we are trying to say is every new application that your organization builds needs to incorporate privacy design and privacy rules in itself by default. What do I mean by that? See, your application developer may not know that wherever in his application he is providing a form to the data subject to collect his personal data, it is important to show the privacy policy, which when gets shown to the external public is called privacy policy of an organization. When it is shown to the people, right, when it is exposed to outsiders, what is it called? Privacy notice. That is called as privacy notice, right? So the point is, your software developers in their SDLC lifecycle need to know that any form where they are collecting personal data about people, about the data subjects, they must first provide notice. And they cannot collect data without an explicit opt-in where the user says, I'm in. I'm providing you with data and I'm fine with your privacy policy, right? So our SDLCs need to change now. Our software development life cycles need to include privacy by design. We need to be more privacy aware. Then there is more into design. Please don't think it is just about the UI. Where do I store the personal data, right? My database columns must be masked. They must mask sensitive personal information, right? They must pseudonymize the user. A user should not be able to be identified even if the database is stolen or there is a data breach, right? We must make sure that personal data is masked, it is encrypted, it is, stored. Privacy by design. A new application, when your firms begins to design from that time itself, earliest in the SDLC cycle, in the requirements gathering phase itself, you have to make sure that privacy is looked at as an important component. It is very important that you make sure that privacy becomes critical. It becomes important that it is incorporated in the design of the application, in the requirements, in the user stories. If you are developing your application in agile methodologies, right? Your user stories must capture the fact that any form, we will not collect personal data unless there is requirement. If we are collecting personal data, we will protect it. If we are collecting personal data, we will mask it. If we are collecting personal data, it should not expose the user, right? We must make sure it is encrypted. We must collect personal data only after providing the notice and receiving opt-in from the user. Now, privacy is changing the way applications used to behave or interact with the end users, right? Then comes privacy impact assessments. Although I will be talking more about privacy impact assessment, let me tell you what privacy impact assessment is. Whenever existing process change or product change, or during a new product when it is made, we have to perform a privacy risk assessment. We have to look at what is the kind of information that we are collecting. We have to look at what are the type of controls that we have. What do we mean by controls? Or measures. Encryption, for example, encryption of the database is a control, right? Performing user access reviews of everyone who has access to personal data is a control, right? We need to look at what is the scope of personal data that we are collecting. We need to look at how much personal data we are collecting. We need to look at, how we are implementing technical controls, right? And we have to give a risk rating that a particular project, a product, a process, a change brings in. Come on, 5 years back, we did risk assessments. For those of you who might have attended my other session on risk management that I did for Bangalore chapter ISACA, may recall the depth of risk assessments, right? And in that also I spoke. What is changing in risk assessment? Privacy risk assessment or privacy impact assessment is very quickly becoming a skill set that all of you must have. If you want to succeed as risk managers in risk functions, in cybersecurity, doing risk assessments, you cannot without knowing anything about privacy impact assessment. Why? Because even NIST, in their latest NIST 800-37, which is their risk management framework, has integrated risk assessment with privacy risk assessment or privacy impact assessment, right? So we are now, to someone's question, some time back, when I looked at the comments, that will I be talking about how cybersecurity and privacy concepts are integrated? Yes, this is how they are integrated. You cannot become a successful cybersecurity professional without knowing the basic tenets of privacy, because now they are getting integrated very soon, very fast, right? So it makes all the sense for us to learn privacy, to know privacy, even if we are not currently very much involved in privacy-based projects. Vendor management. Why? Because you remember in our previous discussions, we said that a company collected data from the data subjects, became controller, and then sent it to the insurance company. Who was the insurance company? A vendor. What was the vendor doing? He was accessing personal data of your clients, of your data subjects. You must make sure that he implements, that is the insurance company implements, all those technical controls which you have implemented. What do I mean by that? Let us say, again, let us go back to that example. In my pickle company, I hired 10 people, right? I collected their personal data. While collecting their personal data, I kept it in a database which I encrypted, right? And I confirmed to them through my privacy notice that don't worry, we will take care of your data. We'll protect your data. We will implement technical controls. Some of the technical controls we have are like encryption of the database. Excellent. And then you transferred that data, you gave some part of that data to an insurance company. What did that insurance company do? First of all, in its database, it did not encrypt it. I'm not saying insurance companies do that. Please don't misunderstand me. This is a scenario which I'm building up a story to explain the problem of what happens practically, where challenges are in corporates, in privacy programs. So as a corporate, I was very prudent with my controls. I was I took due care of implementing the database encryption. But when I handed over the data to my vendor, that vendor did not encrypt the data. Oops, right? And he printed that data out on printouts, which he forgot on some other client's desk. And that data has now leaked, right? For the breach, who will be penalized? The data controller will be penalized, right? So what does the data controller now needs to do? The regulatory authority is going to come and ask for a $1.5 million from the data controller. The data controller needs to make sure that he has strong vendor governance process. He needs to make sure that before he transfers any data to the vendor, there is a contract in place. There is a MSA in place, master service agreement in place. What does the master service agreement do? It very clearly documents and drafts, right? What all things are there that I would expect from you for the data that I am providing. Please encrypt the data. Please make sure you don't print the data out. It has to very clearly lay out the technical controls or the expectations that it has from the vendor. So vendor management, as you might know, again, traditionally has always been a part of cybersecurity. What is happening now? Regulations like GDPR are mandating vendor management on a different front. They are saying all those vendors that are accessing personal data, identify them and make sure they follow the same technical controls as you do, or what you have committed in your privacy notice to the data subject. Where is the challenge? My $1 million answer, okay? Get it in writing. You can take my word. No book has written about it as of today. It's not on the internet. You will not find it. I could tell you because you will learn it only when you are a practitioner on the ground. I practiced this subject for 20 years, honestly. Understand where the challenge would be. When you go to your procurement department that does procurement of your vendors. He has an ERM system, right, using which he has vendors where he has collected information about the vendors. If you go and ask them that, could you tell me of the 3,000 vendors that I have, which are the vendors that have access to personal data? He has no attribute or no field in his form that he ever collected. So he doesn't even know which of your 3,000 vendors actually have access to personal data. And GDPR expects you to basically go to those vendors and perform audits, first of all. Ensure that their master service agreements have these requirements, technical requirements. Make sure that they are implementing the controls for securing the personal data. What is the ground reality of the so-called companies which claim compliance against GDPR? When we say that, please give me the list of your vendors who have access to personal data that you collect from data subjects, they fail to give us an accurate and timely list. What would be the severity of the finding? Critical or a high. If the regulator comes, what is he gonna do? He is gonna fine you 4% of your global turnover for non-compliance, no matter how much you claim to be compliant. And is this the story in every other company that we visit? The answer is a yes. Most of them currently do not have a very clear process of identification. Many of them have done it. Many of them are in the process of doing it. Many of them are making changes to their ERP systems, with the procurement department, to make sure that any new vendor who comes in, he very clearly identifies whether or not he will have access to personal data. Understand, not all of my vendors are going to have access to personal data, right? If someone is going to help me, for example, to perform vulnerability scans of my servers, he may or may not gain access to personal data at all of my clients, right? If someone is going to help me design a new application, that's it. He's a software development company. He's a body shop. He has sent me 20 application developers. They are going to develop a state-of-the-art application for me and go home. Will that company be considered as a vendor who has access to personal data? The answer is a no. Whereas the insurance company to whom I provide my employees' personal data is an example of a vendor who will have access to personal data. Now, of the 3,000, 4,000, 8,000 vendors that I have, I need to figure out which vendors have access to personal data, right? So I need to set those processes, right? Breach notification, operational and technical security measures, and breach notification within 72 hours of identification, called as personal data breach, has a broad definition, right? Question for all of you. I would like you guys to answer in true or false in your comment section, please. That would also give me a sense that whether this session is going the right way. Now, let us get into the actual nitty-gritties. Let us get our hands dirty. The next 30 minutes are the most important time of this session. As I said, right? Any session where you see my name, I would very strongly suggest you always register for it. I'm gonna spend 5 minutes in reading out an article called as Article 30. I told you, right? There are 99 articles in GDPR. GDPR is all about articles. It's a regulation. That is how an article gets drafted. The reason why I have created this slide and the subsequent slides is to give you guys a sense of how is a regulation drafted, privacy regulation drafted, and how do you interpret it. What you need to know is records of processing activity is the spinal cord of GDPR, okay? Or is the spinal cord of your privacy program. I've seen many organizations claim that, oh yeah, nowadays in our organization, over the past 2 years, we have been implementing a privacy program. First question, any auditor will ask, or any regulator will ask, or anybody who understands privacy will ask, so do you have your records of processing activities tracked? If the answer is a no, you have done nothing about privacy, or you know nothing about privacy. If you have drafted a privacy policy, if you have updated your privacy notice, right? If you are trying to identify which are the vendors who access personal data for you, right? And if that is all that you have done in the privacy space, I'm sorry to say you have not done anything in privacy. Privacy begins with an organization drafting records of processing activity. Is it written in any book? No. How am I saying that? Out of my experience on the ground, right? Why? What is a record of processing activity? So as I said, right, in the beginning, I gave an example that what is, record of processing activity. I said, I gave you an example that a company says that, oh yeah, I access personal data. How? People come online and on my website, they can apply for a job, right? And I give employees jobs, so I have their person. And then I sell pickles. So the people to whom I deliver pickle, I have their address as well as phone number and their names. Right? So I have personal data. So do this in that. And then whenever there are offers, right, I have 3,000 email IDs of my probable customers or my target audience to whom I send a bulk email saying that, hey, I am giving 50% discount on my chili pickle, right? It can be anything. Okay, mango. I know many people like mango pickle, but chili is out of the world. So I would still say chili pickle. Okay, that is my best selling product. So when I say that I send that email out saying that chili pickle is at 50% discounts. What you are doing is there are different departments, right, that are having access to personal data of data subjects. There has to be a record that very clearly identifies that which are all the processing activities in your organization through which you touch or process personal data. Why I say touch is even accessing personal data means processing personal data, right? Unless a company has an inventory of all the processing activities carried out across different departments in its organization, it has in some way not even started its journey in implementation of a privacy program. That is the reason why I was struggling with giving a proper name to this session. Why? Because although this session, the way I've drafted this is more educational, I'm trying to bring in the ground realities of what are all the essential components of a privacy program, how an organization establishes it, and what are the challenges. So what I would do here is give you in this example, an organization like a consultant or a privacy team, the DPO, goes department by department by department. They set up meetings or workshops with every department and they explain to them what is personal data, what is sensitive personal data, right? They explain it to them that even if you access someone's phone number or his email address, or you send him an email, you are processing personal data. That is the definition of accessing personal data or processing personal data. Then every department starts opening up about all the personal data that they have. And what is your job as the privacy team? To start drafting. What do you draft? You need to draft what is the name of the personal data. What is the name of the activity? What is the description of the activity, of the processing activity? You need to identify what is the country of origin from where the personal data is received. You have to identify what are the countries to which this personal data gets sent. You have to identify the names of the vendors with whom this personal data is shared. You need to identify the technical controls which are applied on this personal data. And all of this, as you can visualize in your mind, it will look like an Excel sheet with columns, right? And each of the column will capture the data for a processing activity. Perfect. Why do I need to do that? Because the most critical article, or forget about article. If I'm talking about a privacy program, I must know in my organization which all departments access personal data or process personal data. If I don't have that inventory, I am not even starting on the journey of talking about privacy program, right? Now, what does GDPR say? For example, every regulation asks you to do this activity. This exercise is the core of privacy programs, okay? that identify department-wise what are the activities through which you, or what are the processing activities through which you access personal data, identify the description of those activities, identifies the countries from where personal data is collected, identifies the countries where the personal data is sent, identified what is the instrument of this data transfer between the countries. Remember, we spoke about an instrument for transfer of data between countries, a legal instrument, which what was it? SEC, right? We need contractual clauses on the basis of which we would transfer the data between countries. Then we would need to capture that if there are any vendors who get to access this data, we need to capture the IT systems where this data resides. If it also resides on the tape backup, you need to capture it. Because unless you do all of this, whenever a data subject will try to exercise his data subject right, you would not even know that which all systems his personal data resides in for you to go and delete it or do anything with it, right? Having said that, I would quickly spend 5 minutes in reading out what is the, or how is the regulation draft, because I thought this would add ultimate value to your understanding of the subject of privacy, that how does a regulation law draft its requirement and how do you interpret it. Okay, so you have to bear with me because I'm going to read this out aloud for all of you. Okay, each controller, and where applicable, the controller's representative shall maintain a record of processing activities under its responsibility. The record shall contain all of the following information. Now, imagine for all of those who aspire to be auditors, right? There are clear bullets saying that a controller must have at the minimum in his record of processing activities all these columns. If they don't have this column, you are going to give a finding there itself, right? That you do not in your record of processing activity collect all the necessary details or information. What is the mandatory information which you must collect for your records of processing activity? The name and contact details of the controller, and where applicable, the joint controller, the controller's representative, and the data protection officer. The purpose of the processing, a description of the categories of the data subjects and of the categories of the personal data. The categories of recipients to whom the personal data have been or will be disclosed, including recipients in third countries or international organizations. Where applicable, transfers of personal data to a third country or an international organization, including the identification of the third country or international organization, and in the case of transfers referred to in the second paragraph of Article 49(1), the documentation of suitable safeguards. Where possible, the envisaged time limits for erasure of the different categories of data. Where possible, a general description of the technical and organizational security measures referred to in Article 32(1) for each processor, and where applicable, the processor's representative shall maintain in a record of all categories of processing activities carried out on behalf of a controller, containing the name and contact details of the processor or processors and of each controller on behalf of which the processor is acting, and where applicable, of the controllers or the processor's representative and the data protection officer. The categories of processing carried out on behalf of each controller, where applicable, transfers of personal data to a third country or an international organization include the identification of that country or international organization, and in the case of transfers referred to in the second paragraph of the Article 49(1), the documentation of suitable safeguards. Where possible, a general description of the technical and organizational security measures referred to in Article 32(1). The reason why I was reading this was to again reiterate there is a reason why many people from legal fraternity backgrounds succeed in a privacy role. And those of you who aspire to be privacy professionals need to gather or gain some kind of an understanding of reading legalities or legal subjects legal language and interpreting it like how I have tried to do on the right hand side. At a very high level, it says, as a controller or as a processor, an organization must maintain a record of processing activities under its responsibility. Similarly, if an organization acts in the capacity of a processor, it must maintain a record of all categories of processing activities carried out on a controller's behalf, right? Understand this very clearly, that both a controller and a processor is required to have an inventory of all processing activity. I can't reiterate this more beyond this point, right? The importance of this activity is immense. I tried to draw this up. Again, as I said, my intent was to bring to the table on ground, how does it, right? Because the previous slide, you could have seen by yourself by opening the regulation also. The regulation is freely available, right? GDPR.org, you can go there and you can download the regulation. Why are you spending 4 hours on a Friday evening with me? Because I have a promise here that I would bring out the nuances of how things happen on ground based on actual implementation experience from the ground. This is what happens. You would see organizations maintaining this kind of workflows. What does it say? Any business function decides when a new processing activity or a change in an existing processing activity comes in. It goes to a decision box and they decide, is this a new processing activity? 2 possibilities, because it's a decision box, yes or no. Let me first walk you through if it is a new processing activity, right? Then the data custodian. Who is a data custodian? Who is day-to-day in charge of the data, right? He goes ahead and uses a tool like OneTrust. I'm not trying to, I'm not directly, indirectly associated with, any kind of advertisement for OneTrust tool. There are other tools also. Archer GRC also has a very good module. ServiceNow GRC also has a very good module. There are Nimity tools that are also equally good, right? I'm just giving this as an example that the data custodian will go to a GRC tool like OneTrust, right? And he will go ahead and update the solution or an Excel sheet with a new record or a new record of processing activity, right? And after that, changes to the RPAs will be sent to the point of contact for approval, right? Similarly, if it is a no, that it is not a new activity, then even in that case, the data custodian will go ahead and update the RPA in the OneTrust tool and will send it for the point of contact for approval. He will go ahead, check if all the details are there, is everything created, all those bullets, which I said that there must be country of origin, technical controls, who is the data custodian, who is the DPO, all those details are they complete, accurate? He will check that, right? No, he will send it back to the data custodian for correction. If yes, then that record is approved and created in OneTrust. This is the role of a workflow tool to make sure that you have a maker-checker relationship established, right? Which is very similar to policies in cybersecurity or standards in cybersecurity, right? Whenever a new document is created, it is created by the document owner, and there is an approver who is the approving authority. He approves, and it goes in, and then annually you review it, right? On the top right, what you see are the roles and responsibilities, for that are drawn out for an organization, right? This is just a generic organizational chart. This is not particularly depicting any one organization as such, right? But you will find organizations that are investing heavily on their privacy programs to be designing or holding hundreds of such workflows that defines clearly each of their activity that they do, right? That how would someone do records of processing activities? How would someone, the organization approve it? How will it store? What details will be captured in records of processing activities, and so on, right? So having said this, before I go to the next item, right, which is the data protection impact assessment, which is again a requirement of GDPR, which is nothing but I would say it is very closely related to privacy risk assessments. This is another important requirement of GDPR where we had thousands of questions and hundreds of confusions. I'm sure for those of you who have been practicing privacy or who have basically followed up with privacy in the past or have seen actively questions on LinkedIn and social media, there's a confusion around just does GDPR mandate data protection impact assessments, right? Or is it mandatory for an organization to perform DPIA? Now, here is what I would say. Although I would again read out exactly what the article says, right? As is, I'm again gonna be as torturous as I was with the previous section. But the point here is data protection impact assessment is not a mandatory activity. And it is very clearly specified in the article itself that it needs to be performed only if the risk is high. But the question is, how would you know that the privacy risk of a particular process or a product is high? For that, what we generally do and what enterprises globally generally do is they perform privacy impact assessment or they perform a privacy risk assessment. And if the outcome of privacy risk assessment is high risk, it says this activity, this product, this service, this function is gonna have a high privacy risk, then doing a data privacy impact assessment or DPIA is mandatory as per GDPR. So yes, the process is you first do a privacy risk assessment. If the outcome of the risk assessment is a low risk, you don't do a DPI. If the outcome of a risk assessment is this process or this product poses a big privacy risk to the business or to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects, then doing a DPI is mandatory as per GDPR. This is what the regulation exactly says. Where a type of processing, in particular using new technologies and taking into account the nature, scope, context, and purpose of the processing is likely to result in a high risk. To whom? To the rights and freedoms of the natural person, the controller shall, prior to the processing, carry out an assessment of the impact of the envisaged processing operations on the protection of personal data. A single assessment may address a set of similar processing operations that present similar high risk. The controller shall seek the advice of the data protection officer where designated when carrying out a data protection impact assessment. A data protection impact assessment referred to in paragraph 1 shall in a particular be required in the case of a systematic and extensive evaluation of a personal aspects relating to natural persons, including profiling, and on which decisions are based that produce legal effects concerning the natural person or similarly significantly affect the natural person. Processing on a large scale of special categories of data referred to in Article 9(1) or of personal data relating to criminal convictions and offenses referred to in Article 10 or a systematic monitoring of a publicly accessible area on a large scale, right? The way we interpret this is an organization as a controller must evaluate whether a processing activity prior to carrying out the processing activity, right, is likely to result in high risk to the rights and freedom of the data subjects. Example of processing activities that may result in high risk are all of these. So even if you are going to do a CCTV monitoring of the public places, that means you have to do, a DPIA, because whatever that person is doing in the public place, since he is getting monitored, there is a risk to his rights and freedoms, right? That is the reason why there is a lot of debate in Europe about CCTV monitoring of public places now, right? There are new technologies such as facial recognition. Someone just called me and asked me that, Shashank, now most of us are working from home. So as an organization, we want to make sure that we monitor our employees or at least the contractors. How would we know that the contractor who we hired is the contractor who is working from home or not? Because now the contractor doesn't come to office, right? So is there a way we can do facial recognition for the person throughout the day, so that we know that he is the person who is working, who was assigned to our project? My answer was you can do that, but then there is an impact to your privacy program, and there might be a DPIA which would be mandated for you for doing this processing activity. Understand, this is a perfect example of a COVID situation happening. People, instead of working from offices, have moved to work from home, and companies want to monitor whether the same person is working or his spouse is working on his behalf, right? By trying to do a facial recognition monitoring. But they must understand that that is an example of a new processing activity which has a impact on their privacy program. They must contact their data privacy officer before they initiate any such new process, because they are going to monitor sensitive personal data about a person, and the DPO may need to first perform a DPIA before he approves that kind of an activity, right? Where the rights and freedoms of an individual is looked at. So privacy risk management, what are we trying to say? While many privacy risks relate to unauthorized access or disclosure of personal data, some privacy risk may result from authorized uses and other related activities. For example, privacy risks may result from creation, collection, use, or retention of personal data. Privacy risk may arise from launch of a new product, or a merger or acquisition. You just merge with some other company, or you acquire some other company that company had some 10 million records of email addresses of people, because that used that email addresses for a marketing campaign. And from where does these companies get all those email IDs? It is sold. There are companies that sell your and my email IDs, right? By that acquisition itself, there might be a privacy risk that you are bringing into your organization. So you need to now, even during your due diligence processes, have a privacy section, so that you do a privacy assessment, so that you know the privacy risk you are getting into, right? So for those of you who were wondering before this session that how is a privacy risk associated with cyber risk, this is where all of that gets integrated, right? Lack of appropriate notice, transparency, or participation. You're collecting in some web page or web form data, right? You're collecting that data from the data subjects, but there is no proper notice given to the data subject. Imagine a situation where there is more to it, right? Not just the notice part of it. Imagine the other parts of it, like you're giving a notice, but you are not taking the buy-in. What is it called? Opt-in from the data subject. What will happen? It will result in a privacy risk, right? Why? Because the regulator will come, he will check each of your websites, he will check every form from where you are collecting data, and it will, even check for your physical forms, right? And it would ask you questions if you have not taken an opt-in from the data subject before collecting this person, right? So I'm sure by now you might have got a sense of where all of this is progressing, right? Now let us talk about data breach. Data breach is anything that impacts the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of personal data within an organization. Understand, one important factor that I'm trying to highlight here by reading out this definition is the fact that data breach is different from security incidents. Is every data breach a security incident? Okay, let me not answer this question. Let me ask this question to you. Okay, is every data breach in any organization or your organization, should it be considered as a security incident? That every breach for an organization is considered to be a security incident, right? There is no question of the fact that a breach has happened, which means personal data is lost or stolen for an organization, and still there is a low impact on CI. Your confidentiality, your integrity, and your availability is gone. Someone has stolen your personal data, it cannot be a low criticality issue, right? The second thing, but the vice versa is not true. There can be a security incident in an organization which is not a breach. This is an important practical aspect which I want to bring from the industry to you. Understand this. The reason I say that is, imagine that I have a server, okay? The server did not have a patch, and so the server was hacked into by someone. But that server was not hosting any personal data. Are there servers in your organization that are not hosting any personal data? Yes, there is always a possibility. As a result of which, for the organization, this is a very, very critical cyber security incident, right? Of high criticality, but it is not a data breach. Why this is important for us to know this is because your DPO is not gonna go to this authority to tell within 72 hours that there is a breach. He doesn't need to inform that that liability is not there on him, because there was no personal data that was breached. There was no personal data that was stolen. So important part here is, every data breach, the terminology in the industry itself means where personal data is stolen is a security incident. But the vice versa is not true. There could be a scenario where there is a security incident, high severity security incident in your organization, which did not result in data breach. So I've seen people very loosely use these terminologies, but as a privacy professional, try to make sure that you understand this very clearly and you use them intelligently, because there are a lot of legal professionals sitting in the privacy domain. There are a lot of experts sitting in the domain who expects that someone who says he has heard me for 4 hours would know these terminologies very, very clearly, right? This could mean loss of a laptop, memory stake, or anything, lack of secure passwords on PCs, emailing a list of customers to someone in error, giving a system login to an unauthorized person, failure of a door lock, or some other weakness in physical security which compromises personal data, right? So what happens? Staff member discovers breach or potential breach, he goes to the DPO. And it is the DPO's responsibility to inform the Data Protection Commission. Every country in the European Union has a Data Protection Commissioner, right? And that is the regulatory authority. We have to let them know. Any data protection breach or potential breach must be reported without delay to the Data Protection Officer. The timeline you have is 72 hours. What happens if you take more than 72 hours to report and they realize that you knew, but still you took, let's say, 100 hours to inform them from the time you discovered the incident? You are found to be non-compliant to GDPR requirements, and accordingly there will be fines, right? What does the regulation that now in the regulation there are two important articles associated with data breach notification. Okay, I'm not going to read the article out, line by line like how I was doing until now, but I'm going to tell you the interpretation part or what is important. Okay, the two articles here are Article 33 and Article 34. Very important. What it says is, the GDPR mandates reporting of a breach that results in the loss of personal data, which may result in risk to the rights and freedom of the individuals, right? The GDPR outlines personal data breach reporting requirements, specifically addressing when organizations must report breaches and within what time frames, 72 hours after becoming aware of the breach. Perfect. But there is one more very interesting requirement from GDPR, which is Article 34, where it mandates that based on the impacts, the rights and freedoms of the data subject, the data subject needs to be communicated. I getting the point? So what happens is, some years back, there was this hotel group in the US that lost the data of everybody. So it lost its it's lost. By lost, what I mean is someone stole all of the database with email addresses, names of all the people who ever stayed in that hotel, right? Now, based on the assessment of the severity of the breach, it was identified that not only does the hotel group need to inform the regulatory authority within 72 hours, it also need to inform all of the data subjects who are impacted. Now imagine a hotel, a leading hotel group, right, in the US. I would not like to name them, but imagine some 100,000 people, right? You have to notify them either through emails, and where you don't have emails and you have only their street addresses, you have to send them envelopes. You have to literally send them letters. I know in India we have lost the habit of receiving letters, but in US or across Europe, people still receive a lot of, you know, letters, and there is a concept of having a mailbox in front of your house, because every day there is a postman who comes and he drops these letters, and everyone who ever stayed in that hotel got one such envelope. Imagine the kind of effort that the organization has to now do to comply with the requirements of GDPR in case there is a data breach. So naturally, that has made organizations more aware. It has made them more responsible. It has made them realize that if there is a data breach, the kind of cost impact it has, the kind of effort, you know, in ensuring that they fulfill all of the obligations that they have is tremendous, right? I can't stress that enough, that every organization is now ready to invest in privacy programs. They are ready to invest in privacy professionals. There is a privacy team in almost all Fortune 500 companies. Not almost, all Fortune 500 companies. I take my word, right? So we are reaching almost the last parts of our session. I would like to, at this point, introduce you to something that we call as data subject rights. Okay, as I was talking about from the beginning, that every privacy regulation, every privacy intent of privacy program is to make the data subject powerful, is to give him certain rights. What are those rights? There are 8 rights. For those of you who might have read GDPR, those rights are called Article 12 to Article 22, right? What happens in these data subject rights? Right to information. Provide transparency over how personal data is collected, stored, managed, protected, and processed. So every organization must tell through the notice to the data subject very transparently, right, how the personal data is collected, maybe from a website, how it is stored in a database or in a SharePoint, in a, you know, how is it managed, means the complete life cycle. Is it shared with some vendors, which IT systems, right? How is it protected, right? Is it encrypted? How is access controls maintained on it? How is it processed, right? Right to access. Provide individual with access to their personal data and explain how their data is used. So I can write to a Facebook and say that, could you please provide access to my data that you have with you, right? Right to rectification. Rectify any personal data claimed by subject to be inaccurate or incomplete. Like if some of my data is incomplete, I have, or inaccurate, for example, I might have changed my phone number, I have the right to go back and ask them to change it, right? And they have to comply by it. They cannot say, we are not going to change your data. We are busy. We have other things to do. No, I am a data subject. It is my right. I can take you to the court if you do not rectify my data within 45 days, right? Right to erasure, which is also called as right to be forgotten. Remove personal data on request when there is no compelling reason to keep it. Now, I would just pause here. Okay, there is something which I need to explain, because this comes up in many of my seminars which I provide in the subject. The question here is right to erase or right to be forgotten. We need to all understand, or I need to highlight this fact, that right to erasure or right to be forgotten is not an absolute right. What do I mean by that? Let me try to explain this practically through an example. I go to my bank, fair. After going to the bank, I go ahead and I make a transaction to Syria. right? There is a war going on there, things are not very good, or any country as such, where there is some kind of terrorist activity that is going on, and I transfer some data, some money to some people, and then I'm a data subject, right? I call up my bank and say that I have a right, as per GDPR, right to erasure. So please erase all my data from your bank accounts. That is, erase my name, erase my account, erase my data that you have, and my transactions which I have done. The bank would say, sorry, sir, this right is not an absolute right. What we mean by that is removal of personal data on request when there is no compelling reason to keep it. There are various banking acts which have a compelling reason. An example of that would be Anti-Money Laundering Act, AML, right? Which the bank needs to comply with, which needs every transaction to be recorded and stored for 7 years. So for the next 7 years, there is no way we are gonna delete your record of you transferring the data to Syria, your money to Syria, right? This is something very important for us to understand, that every organization, this was just a very, I would say, raw example, right? But every organization may give you a reason why it will not delete your data. And what are those compelling reasons? Or other regulations which mandate it to maintain the data, right? So if we are joining a company to be a part of their privacy program, we must know and we must make sure, right, that we understand these rights and we document our responses very clearly, right? Right to restriction of processing. We can ask any company to stop processing our data. Like I can write an email to Google saying that from here on, please do not process any of my data, right? And they have to honor the request not to process an individual's data for specific purposes. And I can tell them that for which purpose you should not process my data. Right to data portability. I can say that, what is data portability? I have a Airtel number, right? I have provided them with my driver's license. I've provided them with my PAN card, social security number. Tomorrow, I want to move my number. I want my number to be ported to Geo, right? I'm not going to provide the same data to Geo. What I will tell Airtel is, you already have all my data. Please send it to Geo and delete my data from your side. Right to be forgotten, right to portability in a machine readable format. It becomes responsibility of Airtel to send all the data to Geo. I know it is very, very wrong to name such forms. I'm just doing it for the sake of examples, right? They are not involved and these are just examples, right? So provide copies of stored data in a portable machine readable format. It might be Excel, it might be PDF because they are machine readable format. XML, right? Right to object. Allow individuals' data to be stored but not processed. I may allow you to store my data, but please do not process my data. That is right to object, which is different from right to restricting of processing. You have to understand the thin line of difference. I'm asking you not to process my data, or I'm asking you to, I have the right to object, where I'm objecting processing my data, but you can store my data, right? Right to object automated decision. Comply with requests not to automate decision making using personal data. Like how people do it for marketing campaigns, right? When I am trying to look for a toothbrush on a popular, internet-based retailer, he is automatically making decisions on my part, right? That what should I buy? No. Comply with request not to automate decision making, using personal data. So he will only sell what I want to buy. He cannot decide to sell me what he wants to sell. Okay. So how does this data subject rights work? Right? This is an important question. And this is an important slide. So the question here is that I'm trying to say is, as I said, that now I have this data subject right. I have this right that please go ahead and I can ask any company like Facebook to delete all the data they have about me. There's no question about it. GDPR has given me that right. And if I am in Europe, I can exercise my right. Even if I'm not in Europe, I can give it a try, right? Because it depends. If the company still considers me as a data subject and lets me exercise that right. So when I ask them to delete, how will I ask them to delete? Now, this is very important. Every website today now has to have a place from where any kind of our data subject rights request could be sent, either through an email or through a web-based form. So in the privacy notice, you will notice that there is a mandate to provide an email ID where I can send my data subject request, which is one of the mandatory requirements of a privacy notice. Okay, excellent. So what I do, I see abc at xyz.com for a XYZ organization. I open my Gmail account. For those of you who may not know, my Gmail ID is tracethetruth@gmail.com. Okay, I open that and I write an email to abc@xyz.com and I tell him this. I used to basically be a consultant for xyz.com some years back, and I would like you to delete all of my data, right? Because I have the right to be forgotten. I would request you to acknowledge the receipt of my email and confirm once you have deleted my data. Regards, Shashank Ora. What is the challenge with the organization? If you work for that organization, what are organizations struggling with? They will receive an email from a very silly kind of a mail ID called tracethetruth@gmail.com saying that he is Shashank Ora. How do they even know that he is Shashank Ora? They will delete all the data of Shashank Ora and then Shashank Ora says, I never asked for any such thing. So one of the biggest challenges that organizations faced in the past 3 years, and they currently are also facing, is data subject authentication process. Initially many organizations thought that let us go ahead and ask them to provide their PAN card number or SSN number, so that we could confirm that we can authenticate that they are who they say they are. But then they realized that there is a privacy impact of doing that. IAPP, International Association of Privacy Professionals, very clearly states that for authenticating an individual, it is a bad practice to collect more personal data. Why? Because then you have to manage all that personal data. You need to have encryption of the databases. You need to have pseudonymization done. You have to done anonymization done. You have to, so there is a particular best practice associated with data subject authentication process. Whenever I receive a request from anybody stating that he would like to exercise his data subject right, I would do this. Number one, I would acknowledge that I have received his request as an organization. And trust me, 90% of the organizations are basically, as of today, in their privacy program, running their privacy operations center with this process flow that you see on the screen. Okay, so this is again $1 million piece of knowledge. What are they doing? They first request that if you are still with the company, right? If you still have my mail ID, mailbox, please send me a mail from that. Then the user is authenticated, right? If not, but I may say that no, I used to work, now I don't work, I don't have access to that mail ID. Then I will say, please provide me with a unique ID, which you may have, like your employee ID, your vendor ID, your whatever ID, right? If you don't have that, then do one thing. From tracethetruth@gmail.com, right? Send me. And so what I would do is, you send me your request. I will look up the email of Shashank Roy, which I have on my system. And on that email ID, I will send a one-time code, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to replay that code to me. Then I would know that you are who you are, right? So what will happen is, if someone is trying to impersonate as Shashanko Roy, who doesn't have access to Shashanko Roy at kpmg.com's mail ID, will not be able to access, because he will not have access to Shashanko Roy at kpmg.com. And that is what my client will have, to which it will send, right? So if I am not able to tell my employee ID or vendor ID, if I am not able to replay, right, the one-time code sent on my email ID, which is registered with my client, right? If I cannot send an email from the client's mailbox, like mail ID, mail domain, then I have to physically go and show my identity. Only then that organization will authenticate me and will take my data subject request ahead. Okay, let me just pause here and just give you a sense of reality of where the industry is. Just imagine how many data subject requests would a company like Facebook, Google, or Amazon, or any other company get in a day? You know how many it is? Close to 1 million. Imagine after receiving 1 million data subject requests, someone saying, give me right to access, someone saying, please erase my data, someone saying, right, please port my data, someone saying, I object to you processing my data, someone saying, please restrict my processing data. Imagine the size of a privacy team required to interpret each request. Okay, I will give you even more realistic terms, as I gave you previously. When I write to an email to a company and says, please delete my data, it needs to go to the data discovery tool or records of processing activity to figure out that where all could this person's data be in my organization. Second problem, the privacy team will not have access to all the applications, ERP systems, all of the GRC solutions, all of the IT systems from where the data needs to be deleted. So it has to now bring in, raise tickets to IT teams of different departments to ask for, please search for this person's data and delete it. It has to look at all the structured data stores. It has to look at all the unstructured data stores and delete data. Imagine the kind of task that they would do, right? Imagine the seriousness of the task that is in hand, right? Not an easy activity. Every organization is struggling. So again, I'm not trying to be sarcastic about this fact, but organizations that believe that they are already compliant with GDPR, they are far, far away from it, right? Because we all are learning together. We all are figuring a new scenario every day. Some days are so bad that we receive, more than 1 million requests. We need to authenticate those, and then we need to look at what the request is, and then we need to look at our records of processing activities to identify where all this data could be. We have to take help of different IT teams to access that data and to do whatever is requested by the data subject. So privacy teams by no means are going to be a small teams. They're as big as the SOC or NOC teams for organizations now already, right? And the future is even bigger for the privacy teams, right? Here I'm bringing a knowledge check, right? Imagine that you are the DPO, and I would wish that my friends on this call one day become DPOs. They are very, very senior officers in organizations, right? And I get to interact with them, and they receive this email. I want you to type your response, that what would you respond to this email? What I want to know is it a valid request? Yes or a no? And would you like to go ahead and approve this request? Or you would reject this request? What would you do? If you are in the privacy team of an organization and you receive this email, the question is, how would you treat them, right? So the complete reason why we sat for 4 hours today is to understand this fact that a person X should not be able to see person-wise data. Person X should not be asking for person-wise data. He has no reason to ask for person-wise data. He has no authority or business to ask for personal-wise data. This is personal data. This is what we are trying to protect, right? So, very correct. All of you are right, that under Article 13 and Article 14, right, Joe cannot provide the data subject, the company cannot provide the data subject, Joanna Doe, the information for Harvey Smith. She may only be provided her personal data subject to being successfully authenticated. So your first answer was also correct, Raj, that we can provide Joanna Doe her data provided she could authenticate herself, right? But under no circumstances will we send her the other person's data. When you start receiving a lot of requests, it's not easy. Sometimes by mistake to a Joanna Doe, Harvey's data gets sent. What do you need to do when that happens? That Joanna had sent an email saying that please send me my data that you have about me, right? And by mistake, what you have sent is someone else's data, Harvey's data, to that individual. What would you do as the next step, as the DPO of the firm? What you have to do now is, it is a data breach that has already happened in your organization. Every data breach is also a security incident. You must within 72 hours inform the regulatory authority that you provided someone called Harvey Smith information about Joanna Doe. You have 72 hours, right? From Nimity, I have brought in one case study for you. There are many such case studies on Nimity. I would very much appreciate, you guys going there and reading this material. Awesome material, right? Now, so this is an example where this is a real-time, real example. Okay, there's no made-up example. This is from Nimity, a very authentic source of information. Okay, now this is an example where an organization where a data subject was actually paid, right? And a big bank had to actually, shell out the fines. Read this, right? So what is important here to understand is the fact that it is not true that every time a data subject, files a complaint about any entity, the court basically gives, or the regulatory authority gives the decision on his side. Just like any other court of law, all the proceedings with related to a privacy appeals board goes through the process of review of evidence. So we must have the requisite, necessary, correct set of evidence, for us to basically substantiate our claim, right? So it is not true that organizations are unnecessarily being troubled or unnecessarily being fined. Wherever an organization is fined by a privacy authority or a court, there are very valid and solid reasons behind, right? Which are evidence based. Okay. Now I'm coming to the last part of my discussion. And this part, we want to talk about the key challenges faced by organizations. Okay. I've not brought in 1,000. I've just brought in 4 more challenges. That what is challenging enterprises today in the privacy arena to truly demonstrate compliance with GDPR or a CCPA or an Indian, Privacy Act, right? And not even talk about regulations. I'm saying about establishing an effective and efficient privacy program, right? Here are the challenges. The first one, privacy programs are not inherently linked across cybersecurity, information lifecycle management, legal hold, and third-party risk. Something that we discussed, right? That currently I may be doing a cybersecurity-based SIG, that is a standard for information gathering based, questionnaire based review of my third parties. But in that, I may not have a visibility of which are those vendors, who are also accessing personal data, and how do I go ahead and perform a privacy review on those, right? There is no linkage. Same way, there are various cyber security, links between privacy and cyber security. Example of that might be, I might like to know that who all have access to the systems that hold personal data. What I mean to say is, there is an access review program already established within the cybersecurity world. I want to know that how many systems that hold personal data for which access review has already been performed this year. And that answer is not readily available with the IT teams. Why? Because lifecycle management, information lifecycle management and system lifecycle management is weak. Currently, if you go to the CMDB of a company and ask them that tell me in the CMDB how many systems are there that hold personal data, they will struggle to do that. Most companies, I'm not saying all, right? That inherent linking of IT processes, IT security processes, and privacy has to happen. Every system must have a privacy rating now. Every system, so that at any point you would be able to identify those systems which are in scope of a privacy review. We literally are struggling on the ground when we go to a bank and say that the scope of this review is all IT systems, all servers which are holding privacy information. They are looking at us like we have asked them of some impossible item, because there are thousands of virtual machines that they have launched on the cloud. So I know there were some questions around how is privacy related to cloud. This is how privacy is related to cloud. There are hundreds of systems that an organization creates and terminates every minute, which is on AWS cloud or Azure cloud or Google cloud, right? So the question is, real-time CMDBs, identification of those systems that host personal data. There is definitely a gap in the industry currently. Second problem is records of processing activities, because no, it is not a one-time exercise. We have to understand that. Every time anything changes with regards to the processing activities, or the records of processing activities need to be updated, right? That is where records of processing activities and associated data maps fail to demonstrate accurate inventory of personal data and consistency with automated data discovery solutions. What happens is this. As I said, the practice is you go department by department, you do a workshop, right? And people say that, oh yeah, this is a processing activity for which I have these 3 types of personal data. And let's take an example. I go to a marketing department. I find there are 5 processing activities, and they have identified 11 systems associated with those 5 processing activities on which they use for processing personal data. Excellent. Then I come home and I next day go back with my data discovery solution and I run a scan for the marketing division. And I find they said 11. But there are 176 systems having personal data, right? Which they may not even be aware of. And there might be several records of processing activities which they could not tell me intelligently or through their awareness, where they actually access personal data which they are not able to exactly draft. So the records of processing activities for many organizations are incomplete or inaccurate at this point in time. Data discovery tools or automated scans, when we are running them, they are not mapping back or tying back to the data identified within the records of processing activities. Big problem. Breach readiness. Very interesting. I'm sure you guys will all agree, because you all must be watching this in your organizations. Readiness. The example which I gave, Article 34, data is breached. Now you need to send emails to 100,000 people, right? They are not ready. There are no processes to do that. There are no systems to do that, right? There are you must have heard about exercises, right? Mock drills. Mock drills for security incidents have been established by most Fortune 1000 companies, but they are yet to start doing every Friday an exercise of breach, of what will we do when personal data is breached. Who do we need to inform? Do we have all our data controllers contact details ready? Because we are a processor for so many controllers. If there is a data breach, we must inform them immediately when a breach happens. So they must do these drills, which are currently not happening. Once a breach happens, they realize that for the 1,000 data controllers which a big organization has, right, he doesn't have the right DPO contact to whom he has to write, or the DPO has left the job in that controller's company and they don't know who the DPO is. How will they even inform that individual, right? Breach readiness. Data breach readiness strategy does not include plans for scaling up teams. I'm forgetting the name of the gentleman, but he had a very interesting question that what is the role of forensics? This is the role of forensics, right? How will I bring in 20 forensic experts after a data breach? Because I may not have anyone on my payroll, or I may have only one, but I may need 20, right? Or I may need 5. What is it that I'm going to do? I may need NCASE. NCASE is by far one of the best, forensic technologies tool. I may not even have licenses for doing forensic investigation for a data breach, right? We find many organizations lacking the strategy for being breach ready, right? Data subject rights. As I said earlier also, it looks like a very small activity to establish a privacy program, but by now, I'm sure you guys would be able to appreciate the complexities involved, right? In actually setting up a privacy program, right? Privacy teams do not have access and visibility to end-to-end personal data lifecycle. Support for data subject rights do not involve teams at an enterprise level, right? What we mean by that is you cannot have one central team that is gonna take care of all data subject requests. Why? Because there are hundreds of applications involved. There are hundreds of databases involved, data repositories involved, to which a centralized privacy team may or may not have access to. And it needs to figure out predefined processes like the one which I showed you, right? Where the roles and responsibilities of every team is clearly documented for data subject rights operations to succeed, right? My take is that all of this data which you just saw, these 4 areas are pretty fresh, pretty realistic, what we see in the industry happen, right? What is the way ahead? NIST has released 800-53, which is one of its best control catalogs. In that, which it published in 2018, it included, it extended its control categories from 18 to 20. The 2 new categories, one of them is privacy. Why am I saying that? Because that is the way ahead. Every organization would now need to revamp their control catalogs, and they would need to have a new section called privacy, right? On the right hand side, as I previously also said, risk assessments need to become more robust, and they must integrate with privacy assessments, right? Already NIST has released, whatever I'm saying, I'm not making up from my own mind or experience. NIST has agreed to it. They have released NIST 800-37 revision 2, available free of cost to download. Please go ahead, feel free to download NIST 800-53 revision 5, freely available. Please download NIST 800-37, the risk management framework, freely available. Very clearly it lays out that how now risk management will integrate with privacy risk assessments, and that will be the next new in the organization, right? So for those of you who want to consider a career in privacy, who are interested to know more about privacy, who want to know what are the trainings available, what are the certifications. The top body in the world is IAPP, right? International Association of Privacy Principles, which offers these 3 certifications. CIPP, which is available, which is the global standard for the go-to person for privacy laws, regulations, and frameworks. And of course, we understand that regulations are geography specific, right? So what happens here is CIPP comes in various flavors, like CIPP US, which focuses on US privacy regulations. CIPP-E, very popular because of GDPR, which focuses primarily on GDPR, but other privacy regulations in the Europe. CIPP-A for Australia, CIPP Asia, right? These are the 4 variations of CIPP based on the kind of clients you support, based on the geography you are based out of. You are free to pick up any of the CIPP certification. CIPM, typically for whom is the CIPM certificate? There is this question. The first and only privacy certification for professionals who manage day-to-day operations, right? They generally go ahead with the CIPM certifications. Let me talk about CIPT, privacy technologists, the industry benchmark for IT professionals worldwide to validate their knowledge of privacy requirements, right? A lot of things like privacy by design and all of that we spoke is the focus of CIPT certifications. So for technical people, CIPT is a good certification. For people who want to know more about laws, privacy laws and privacy regulations for a particular geography, CIPP is a very good certification. CIPM is a certification for people with privacy day-to-day operations, right? Many people may want to know, is CIPP, CIPT, CIPM done in a sequence? The answer is no, there is no sequence to it. I've done my CIPP US. I've done my CIPT's preparations, but I have not yet completed my own CIPM, right? But I definitely have that. In the meanwhile, it might be a good point to also mention about ISACA, which is one of the world's biggest certification bodies. It is the body which provides certifications like CISA and CISM, that is Certified Information Systems Auditor and Certified Information Systems Manager. Recently, they have launched this certification called a CDPSE, Certified Data Privacy Solutions Engineer, which is an ISACA certification. Very, very trusted body, very, very valuable certification to have. Currently, there is no examination which is happening for CDPSE certification. So how are people getting certified in CDPSE? Through an early adoption program. So what happens in this? This is a limited time opportunity where candidates who show that they have the necessary experience, right, can, in the CDPSE domain, can basically apply and they can go ahead and through grandfathering get this certification, right? So on LinkedIn, whatever you might have seen, people claiming of completion of CDPSE certification, they have all got it through an early adoption program. And none of them has written the exams because the exams have not yet started. Somewhere in 2021, the CDPSE certification will also start, right? So this is what I had from my side. Thanks everybody for attending this session. Stay safe, stay at home. Thank you.